Mr. Josh, how was your previous week?
It was pretty good. Not too much to add because we actually all seem to spend quite a bit of time together this week. So
Yeah.
Well, but the people don't, so
yeah,
they
people
can hear
don't.
about it.
Yeah. Well, we can let you talk about it. A friend got me a Pokemon Shield, so I've been finally playing that, which is pretty good. I mean,
So far, so good?
yeah. I mean, it's more Pokemon. The UI is pretty clean, which is what I like.
Graphically, it looks cool.
Yeah, no, graphically it looks very fine.
Music's cool. I heard the boss anthem's pretty badass. Or
Music's pretty good during the gym. Yeah, so that's one thing. The whole gym challenge it's so esports.
Is it?
Everything
That's
is
kind of what they're
Pokemon
going for, I guess.
esports. I mean, you wear the jersey. The Pokemon champ has a cape that just has a shit ton of ad logos on it. So it's all fucking esports. I think that the rival team is kind of funny because they just seem like very over enthusiastic football fans, essentially. It's funny because when you first encounter them and then you beat them, they actually apologize.
Really?
For causing a ruckus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's interesting. But some of the little features on there are neat. Like the Pokemon camp is kind of cute. So you just set up a tent and you can play with your Pokemon.
Oh, okay.
You can wave
like a
little
less
feather.
creepy Pokemon to me.
Sure, yeah. You can like wave a little feather with a bell on it, and then you can also play fetch with your Pokemon.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you can make curry.
That I've heard, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you use Slowpoke Tails yet? Have you made them cannibals
No, I
yet?
haven't made any.
Okay.
I haven't gotten any Slowpoke tails. I've only made like pasta curry.
Sounds cool though.
Yeah.
Very reminiscent of the old. What was the one? Poffins.
Almost. There's a part where you have to stir.
Nice.
So first you have to fan the fire, then you stir the pot, and then you have to put love in it. And that one's a bit weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to know how to put the love into that one.
Man.
What else?
Yeah.
What else you got going?
That was mostly it. Just Pokemon this week.
Mallory, anything relevant to gaming?
I played Ori's Blind Adventure. I've been playing a lot of that.
Is that really called that, or are you just making that up? Isn't it
What?
Ori and the Blind Forest?
I know there's Ori and the Blind Forest.
Okay,
I
that
know they
one.
made a second one.
Sorry.
I don't know.
Which I think is also not called. I think it's like Ori and the Wisp or something like
maybe.
that. So, but anyways,
I mean, we don't know. Maybe
Anyways.
Ori did get blinded.
And then I've been playing a lot of Minecraft with my nephews. That's been fun. And then
Minecraft, you're on console or PC?
so Ori's on PC and then Minecraft on console.
Okay.
Which apparently the phone game, the mobile game, doesn't work with Xbox Live, which I'm not sure why. Because my nephew can play on his tablet, and my other nephew is only having the problem with his phone.
Does he have Minecraft Realms? Because I think you need that to play over.
I'm not sure because I play on console, so I don't know. We used to be
What
able.
a story.
All three of us used to be able to play together, both on all three of us on mobile, his tablet, and then the phone, and then me on console. But now we're not able to, so I'm not sure
I'm
exactly.
fairly
what's going
sure
on.
that's a Minecraft Realms thing because you need that to play across some platforms.
Probably.
Today's
But-
episode is brought to you by Minecraft Realms from Microsoft. I'm just joking, it's not. But
Not yet.
But yeah,
Not
other
yet.
than that, we've been my week's been filled with seeing you guys
yeah, I know.
more than usually.
Getting tired of that shit. No, I'm just joking. No, it's been a lot of
Right,
fun.
like-
Yeah.
So I'm just going to use that as a segue to get into my week. So we went up to Austin, visited Shubzilla and Bill, family members of the... Well, I said ex and
Yeah,
their
why'd
family.
you
I'm
say
sorry.
ex?
I don't know what's
Friends,
happening.
love them.
friends of
You're
the
the
channel.
one. You're the one who drank, and then I got.
Right,
I'm the
like-
one who. See, thus proving sleep depravity is still more dangerous than drinking. So everybody take that into account. No, anyways, this isn't a PSA for that shit. Yeah, no. We went
By
to
the
go
way, I'm
see.
drinking water, guys.
There you go. We went to go see the old guests Shubs and Bill up in Austin. A lot of fun over there. We got to see MC Chris pull a meme at the show. That was a thing. We also celebrated my birthday,
Yeah.
even though it's early, but at the same time, what better way to have an event organized for you as opposed to organizing one yourself? So we went to the local K-pop night, and that was fun because, why do that when I would have to try to figure out and put
So
together a
much
thing?
dancing.
It's just like, it'd be easier that way.
So much dancing.
And then now we're here.
Love
I feel
it.
like, did I forget another event that had all of us? No, I think that's
I think
it.
that
That's
was
it though. But that was all in the course of the previous, since the last episode,
Yeah.
which is already... That actually just made me realize this week felt pretty long despite being busy, at least for me. Because I just realized that Kylo was just on the last episode, and I felt like a long time ago already. Which, by the way, it's been crazy months so far in terms of downloads for the podcast. So we're when I last checked the statistics on December 5th, we had already exceeded our average month's worth in 5 days.
Nice.
Because it always does go from midnight of the first day till the midnight until 11:59 of the
I feel
last
like
day
we
of
should
the
high
month.
five at this
I
point.
know at that point, but you're gonna probably end up hitting the pop filter. We don't want that. But there you go. A really
Right now, I get
careful
my
high
high fives.
but yeah, no. But what else did I do? Oh, I didn't do it yet. But there was a game I didn't hear about. It came out a couple weeks ago, but I didn't hear about it, which is weird because usually this being my medium, I always hear about like pretty much any game coming out, both indie and major. I just keep track of everything. But a game went under my radar called The Tourist, TOURYST, and it looks interesting. It's apparently, even the description on the game page is kind of vague, but apparently it's like a puzzle adventure game that apparently gets pretty cool. So what I did is, when I saw several publications saying, including Digital Foundry, saying that this could be the Switch game of the year, I said, I'm not going to research anything on it, and I just went out, bought it, and I'm going to play it, after all this, because I was busy sleeping and getting ready for today. But I just was like, I'm going to go into this blind, and I have a good feeling about this, especially because the publications I saw putting it up there with high praise was pretty... well, ones I trust anyways, ones that at least align with my tastes, and on top of that, it's not very often a game that I didn't hear about ends up getting praise. It's usually a game I didn't hear about, and I'm like, oh, no wonder I didn't hear about it. It's dog shit.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's that. That's pretty much it. I didn't have much time to play games. I really wish I did. I got back into Bloodstained again. It's been a while since I touched that. I never beat it, so I picked back on it. Ever since the graphical update on Switch, it's much better. I don't think you bought it on the day the patch dropped, so you never got to experience the blurry mess that was Bloodstained on Switch at launch, which was a shame, because the game itself was one of the, it's the opposite of Shenmue 3. It's like a Kickstarter success story in the sense of the game not being dog shit.
Yeah.
It was a great game, and to be the first proper Castlevania game in a while to just be so... Because what was the last, good Castlevania game? Regular DS, probably? It's been a hot minute.
I don't think there were any on the... Oh, wait, no, there was one on the 3DS, but it was that... it was part of that Lords of Shadow arc.
Because I know Lords of Shadow was not that good.
Yeah.
So, I don't know about
but
that
I haven't
one.
played that one. I know they ported it to Steam, but I never played it on 3DS. But prior to that, the only ones that I'm thinking of were the Dawn of Sorrow.
Dawn of Sorrow, yeah.
Then they had Portrait of Ruin.
Portrait of Ruin.
Then Order of Ecclesia.
Oh yeah.
And of those, I've only played two. Dawn of Sorrow and Order of Ecclesia. Never beat Ecclesia, but I did have a lot of fun with that one. And Dawn of Sorrow was good, but it's a tough act to follow with Aria of Sorrow. And then plus it kind of had that gimmicky stylus thing going, so...
The plague of many a Nintendo console, which thankfully the Switch started with a gimmick and granted the ideas of the Joy-Cons being your party controllers is kind of cool. At least... Unlike the Wii U, the Wii, and the 3DS and DS, which heavily relied on the gimmicks for too long, Switch seems to just be going towards traditional gaming quicker in the lifespan. So, yeah, that's good. But, yeah. That's pretty much of that. Yeah, there's no fancy segue. We have... developer of Desert Child on the line with us, Mr. Oscar Brittain.
Brittain, yeah.
There you go. So yeah, we got Oscar Brittain with us.
Only Americans get it wrong. It's funny.
Go figure, right?
I think it's like like a politeness thing. You're like, oh, well, no one would want to be named after Britain. That's a horrible thing. Like, it's that like rivalry that you guys still have. I think.
I would say that that's probably true. It's ingrained in there. But how you been, man? You been all right? Uh-oh.
Yeah, I'm pretty good. I just moved house, which is alright, you know.
Oh, that's what is it?
You know?
So many our guests have been moving.
Yeah, everyone's
I think
moving season.
I
Didn't
think
you get
3 of the last 6 guests have moved in recent times. So there's that. Anything interesting been going on with you? Been playing anything interesting lately?
Yeah, a little bit of stuff. I'm working on like a new game now, so I'm just trying to like, I'm in that weird mode where I'm just like buying all these games that are like tangentially related to what I'm doing, and then just trying to like force myself to play them, and I'm like, oh, this isn't that much fun.
The old market research.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, like, all my like stuff was packed up for a while, so I was playing a lot of Switch stuff.
Hey.
I bought Katamari.
There you go.
Katamari recently, and I beat that for the first time.
Nice.
Yeah, that game's great. And I played a bit of Destiny 2 when that went free, and I'd like convinced the other half of like the development team on my new game, Rob. I was like, hey man, we should play Destiny. And then we played like once together, and I played it a little bit. And then I came back like 2 weeks later, and he's just like gone through the whole game, and he's addicted to it. I'm like, oh, shite.
Yeah.
This game we're making is never coming out now. Like,
you gotta catch up.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I try to play just like a little bit of every game, but I never finish anything. So yeah, I played a game called Aquilinox recently. Have you guys heard of that?
I haven't had it actually.
No, I can't say I'm familiar with the name.
It's kind of like it's a bit like Sim Life.
Oh.
If you ever played that, like way back in the 90s or whatever, and you like, I don't know, you kind of just like, or it's a bit like Sim Life mixed with Sim Safari, where you're just trying to like keep an ecosystem kind of going, and you can like mutate certain creatures to like do certain things, and you've got to like just create this whole like ecology of like in an area, and like certain creatures will be like, oh, I don't want to live in like an arid climate or like at that altitude, so you've got to like, but then they've got to live next to other creatures, and it's just like really interesting. But,
that sounds good, and it also sounds like the kind of game I'd be awful at. Like, I would just get everybody killed, or put all sorts of put the alligators with the goldfish.
It's so forgiving. I was like playing it, and I'm like, I feel like I should be failing because I'm really bad at those games normally. But I follow the developer on YouTube, and he does these like just development blogs that are really, really nice. I think it's Thin Matrix is like his YouTube thing, and he just does these like weekly devlogs where he goes through them, but like he edits them into this way as like a slice of life, like what I've been doing for the week, and it's like, and then cool. I went to this art gallery, and he like films it like a vlog. It's really cool. So yeah,
that's pretty awesome. You know, and I was actually listening to a podcast recently that talked about this, and I'm also a fan of it as well, especially in something that's like Kickstarter related or just games being developed in general. It is always nice to know from a consumer point of view, or in our case, content creator, and in some cases, first impressions or review videos, to see where it is the project we're anticipating, especially if we threw some money at it towards Kickstarter, because, you know, I'm going through my list of games I've backed, and I'm just kind of like, some devs do a really good job, and I understand, you know, you're busy developing the game, so it's not the easiest thing to also constantly keep everybody in the loop. But it is really cool kind of getting these up-to-date things of where the game is at the moment. So that's really cool that guy does that, though. I think it's a very cool, creative way to do it, to mix vlogging with status updates.
Mm-hmm. So on like the flip side of what you just said, I was just looking at this game that I don't even know if I backed it, but I've been following it, and it was 2014 was the Kickstarter, and it's not out. And
that's a painful one.
But it only got like $5,000, so that's, you know, fair enough.
That's understandable.
That much money, but like, Yeah, it was this game called 24 Killers, and I'm like, is it still coming out? And I'm trying to find the guy like on Twitter to be like, hey, is this game like done? He doesn't have Twitter or anything. I'm like, I don't know. He did an update like 6 months ago, and then it was like 6 months before that one. So I don't know, man. Maybe it's coming out.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem with Kickstarter being a huge gamble. It's like there are so many caveats with that. But, you know.
Yeah.
But when it's good, it's good. I mean, there's that. I guess that's why people still make the risk that they give. I mean, money management and how much you're asking for, it's like you're always trying to balance how much you can ask for without sounding like an insane person. But at the same time, you need to ask the right amount because people don't understand that, especially if they're doing this as a full time, that's bankroll. Like that's your yearly salary and everything's lump sum in that total normally as well. Because it's hard to work a 9 to 5
There's a child's Kickstarter. I asked for like, I think I asked for like 12,000 Australian, which is like, I don't know, 9,000 US or something. And I got like 14 and a half or something like that. And then you actually go through that, it ends up being just over 12 because you've got to give X amount to Kickstarter or whatever.
Right.
And then the game, and then at that point, as a child, I'd probably spent like $4,000 or $5,000 working on it to get it to that point. And then you get that money, and then you like, and then like stuff after that, like that money ran out at some point, and I had to like borrow money and stuff.
Yeah, that's
so
a
just
tough
on
thing.
like the developments. Yeah, just on the development side of things, it probably cost close to $30,000.
See, that's
like Australian,
that's so...
like 22 US.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, like my publisher, Akapara, probably put like 80 US, like 80,000 like into it and stuff. So like it was like a lot of money.
Yeah, no, that's...
And people don't realize that. They're like, oh, what the hell? We backed this game. And, you know, people people are allowed to complain and whatever about, you know, the quality of a product if they thought it was going to be one thing or the other. But people, when they're just like, oh, I don't understand why this took so long or why it cost so much, or like, we gave you a bunch of money and you're just like, you gave me like 10% of what the game cost, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
and that's
really,
a huge thing to take into consideration, absolutely. Like, you hear about that all the time, even big studios. For example, one of the notorious examples of a game that a studio and a game and someone who is well known in the industry was the creator of Mega Man and going into Mighty Number 9 and absolutely mispredicting how much money he needed in the Kickstarter, not taking into consideration the huge chunk that Kickstarter takes out of the funds and stuff like that. And we're not trying to villainize Kickstarter because we understand they're a business too. That's how they make their money, is they take that cut. But I think people sometimes don't realize how much that cut is. And again, like you said, how much money that goes into, you know. And I think it was very nice of you to say that. You know, obviously as a consumer, you can say, you know, whatever the hell you want. It's actually going to be a topic of ours later on in the cast. But that being said, though, you got to really consider sometimes the logistics of things is crazy sometimes. Like you said, the amount of money that went into that, right? You take that and then you multiply it to the scale of some of the games that came out of there, like Bloodstained. People bitched and moaned about how that took forever to come out, but at least it came out good. You know, some of the games we talked about, you know, there was that one game I almost backed. It was like some survival thing, the dinosaur world type thing, and that ended up either being a piece of shit or never coming out. Oh, no, it never came out. They do cut and run. So after, you know, first it was like really consistent dev updates, then it became monthly, then it became like once a year, and then the dude just disappeared from the internet. And like he got a ton of money for that Kickstarter and just fucked off. And the problem is Kickstarter in their TOS basically go, you guys have the right to go pursue them in legal dispute, but we don't have to do shit because we're just the middleman. So you guys put your trust into the dev and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, so Desert Child did come out, though, so thankfully we're not having you on the cast because the game didn't come out. But how did all that kind of come about? Like, had you worked on games before in terms of, like, released in a retail format like this was? Or was this your first retail game?
Yeah, I'd like self-published a game on Steam way back when like Greenlight was a thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I had this game that I kind of made that was just like top-down pizza delivery game. It was really weird, and I kind of like made it, and it had a Greenlight page or whatever, and then I just put it up on Game Jolt and just kind of forgot about it. And then I got all these like Google alerts sent to me being like, oh, you know, Desert Child, blah, 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 World's Fastest Pizza, that's what it was called. And this YouTuber called the Diamond Minecart had like played it, and it got then like 30,000 upvotes or something.
Oh, wow. It just popped all of a sudden.
Yeah, so it suddenly shot to like the top of Greenlight because this guy played this game and was just making it look like the funniest thing ever. This was like 2014, 2015 or something. And and that got it greenlit, and I was like, oh, cool. Well, I guess I got to make this game like really good now. So I spent like a year kind of polishing that up and released that just on Steam, just for Windows. And then, and then I was like, I want to make this other game, and I made Desert Child and kind of started off as one thing and then turned into something else. And then finally I like had this vertical slice, and I wanted to just like send it to publishers, and I was going to send it to like Devolver and all the different guys and be like,
God, I love Devolver.
Money, please. But, and then as I was like readying up this sort of like this press kit thing for it to send to publishers, I saw the Indiecade, which is a festival in California, I think, just California maybe. They were doing an E3 kind of booth, and they were like, oh, submit your games for that. So I just like sent it to them, and they were like, yep, come over, you just got to pay for your ticket. And I was like, great. So bought a ticket, went over there, then met up with David and Yunsung from Akapara Games while they were showing like right next to me. And David was like, I was really ill at the show as well, and I was the only person at the booth, and he was like, just go and get some water or something, have something to eat, I'll look after the booth for you. And then I came back, he's like, all right, you owe me, we're publishing the game now. And I'm like, what? So but that was kind of it. And I just met them and was like, yeah, really wanted to go with them as publishers, and then I ran a Kickstarter just to cover some costs and stuff, and yeah, we kind of went from there.
There you go. Yeah, no, that's really cool. So Desert Child, I believe even in the store description, at least on Switch, mentioned some of your influences and stuff like that. Now, with that being the case, it almost does, like from the aesthetics to the kind of like the chill hop soundtrack and everything like that. Is that very much elements and stuff that are familiar to you personally, or was it more for the development theme and aesthetic of the game, like when you kind of thought of everything, like soundtrack to visuals?
It was all pretty just like natural, but just what I thought was cool at the time. You know, Cowboy Bebop obviously is a big kind of thing. Like I really like that show. And then Akira and Redline. I don't know if those. I don't know what it says in the store description. Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. I'm fairly sure it listed those anyway.
Yeah. Those are the three that I always say to people. But Cowboy Bebop, I watched when I was like 18 or 19 or something, and I really liked that show. And then people kind of like friends and things were like, oh, have you seen Akira? Have you seen Redline? You should watch those when they played the demo and stuff. And I watched them and I was like, oh yeah, and I kind of incorporated parts of those. Those are really cool films. But yeah, and like the music was sort of just something, you know, I have a sort of a musical background. I played in a band and stuff, but I never really made like chill hop or anything. And when I started making it, my band sort of like fell apart, and I bought a copy of Ableton Live, and I was just like, yeah, I'll give this a shot, and sort of taught myself during development how to use that, and I just started making like little beats and things, and I was like, oh, this sort of works with the game. So yeah, but it kind of just made that the soundtrack.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like I really like hip hop and things, but I just never really tried making it or anything. So
right, no, and that's definitely a different,
you know, kind of worked. So yeah,
that's cool. No, that's really cool. when it came to the idea of like the game like layout and the way you're like you went for like minimalist or lack of menus by game design, the way you tried to have it when you went to each of the stores to keep everything, you went with very minimal tutorials. You know, it obviously you weren't going with obtrusive HUD too much. You weren't going with any sort of like reading blocks of text to figure out how to play. Some of it was even trial by error. I know one thing, and I could just it's one of those things where I could have just not been paying attention at first. But I know the thing that stumped me for a second was the hunger thing got me at first, because I remember after the first race I was trying to proceed again, but I couldn't at first, and then that's when I realized, I said, oh, my hunger meter. I said I should probably eat before the next race.
Yeah, there's so much like back and forth and getting like people to test it, and they're just like, it's broken, and sending it back to me. I'm like, it's not broken, and then try to make it more clear. But people generally, that like I'm sort of the opinion that people should sort of try to do things and then it not work in a game, and then be like, oh, I don't know what to do, and then they'll just try things until something works, and then
which is what I
design the tutorial around that rather than tell people what to do, because you know, especially in Desert Trial, there's a lot of little hidden mechanics and things that you can do that people, you know, like no one ever gets all of them. People always notice like half of them, and then they'll miss maybe a different like half, and then some people will notice that half and miss the other half.
Right.
And that's sort of, I guess, I don't know if it's by design or if it's just something that I like, but it makes me just think like those people will all think that the game is sort of like different. You know, they'll all have slightly different experiences, even though they're really playing the same thing, because some people will say like, oh, the races are really chaotic and random. And then people who really understood how the races work will be like, oh no, the races are like, they're very, you know, they're actually pretty easy to work out how they work and stuff. And then some people like work out how like money and notoriety and things work, and they can really game it in that way. And other people, you know, focus on a different part. And it's like, you could do all those things, but no one ever seems to like work all those things out in one playthrough. So,
Yeah, no, that's a thing. And so, yeah, when I was playing it at first, it is interesting though, because it does start to open itself up more the more you play it, because among initial impression, at first I did think, I was just like, oh, okay, so I think I figured it all out now. But then as you go on more and you do certain things, you know, and I started seeing the secret tapes, and then I started wondering more about mechanics, like what is this notoriety thing and whatever. But you're right, though. Not everyone is the type to be so explorative. I was the type where I wasn't getting it, but then rather than shoot you an angry tweet and go, oh, you fucked up, I went and I just kept, I kept pressing buttons on stuff and looking at my menu and kind of looking at things. But I suppose, yeah, you're right. It does entail different types of people, the way they kind of experience it. But one thing you did note that we're going to talk about later on as part of the main topic in today's episode is the way games do look like to the devs versus the way games do look like to the consumers, and why from the developer side it's so hard to plan what the consumer will see, because you already see everything, you know how everything works already. And then on the consumer side of things, what is fair criticism versus getting frustrated and kind of like you keep jumping off a cliff and then you blame the dev, because there's some critics who are like that, who they're totally fucking up.
There is a definite sort of like train of thought in design that says, if a player is blaming themselves, like the player shouldn't blame himself ever, there's like Don Norman, who's a like kind of famous designer. He always says like, whenever someone uses like a light switch, you know how sometimes you go to a house and there'll be like light switches and there'll be like 3 on the wall,
right,
and you'll kind of flip, and you could live in that house for 10 years and still flip the wrong one to turn on certain lights because they're not. It doesn't like clearly indicate like which one is going to be which or whatever.
Right.
Or like people will say like, "Oh, I'm stupid because I pushed the door mark pull or whatever."
Right.
You know, and it's really that's he would say that's the designer's fault for making a door that looked like it should have been pushed instead of pulled, but then making it a pull door instead. And that's like there's definitely, but that's fair. I think. To kind of always blame the designer, I think it's more
tough.
healthy.
That's a tough
as a
life,
designer
though, man.
to always blame yourself, So but at the same time, I'd say like my defense, and I understand that people maybe don't like aspects of Desert Child and stuff, but I think my defense is that I wanted to make a game for people like me who really appreciated games that don't tell you how to do anything, and I could have really explained a lot more in the game, but for the 80% of people that would have appreciated that, there would have been 20% of people who are like, I clicked through all of it anyway, I didn't want to hear it, so I thought, I'll go with those 20% of people, because in the end, like people who that 20% of people will really love the game for being kind of different in that way, whereas the 80% of people who really would have wanted like a really in-your-face tutorial, I don't know that they would have then still really loved the game, but that would have ruined it for those 20%. So,
right, that's such a tough.
Anyway.
Yeah, that's such a tough balance because. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right about all that. And I think that is what is kind of tough on the developer side of things, although the developer I'm going to talk about later, I'm not giving him the satisfaction of letting him use that as an out. But he's a different story because the way you're talking about it is that dev, who is a extremely high-profile dev, he could definitely take a lesson from, you're more of an indie dev, and, like, you have such a better... like a less spoiled mentality than that guy that like but we'll bitch about him later but I'm
so intrigued now.
Well, I'm glad that's on, and we want all the listeners to be intrigued for what the main topic is. I know, because even my co-hosts have no idea usually what's coming up with that kind of stuff, so there's that. But yeah, and that's the thing. As a developer, you do realize you're going to get the brunt end of things, and you're never going to be able to please everybody, but I think your idea and mentality to please a few who will really enjoy your art as intended, as opposed to just appealing to the everybody else or the mainstream or whatever you want to call them, that maybe it would have been easier to figure out, but then would have taken away from the intrigue of trial and error or messing around with mechanics to try to figure stuff out, because you always get one or the other. You always will hear reviews of games where it was too easy, it was too hand-holdy, everything glowed, the path was too linear, so on and so forth, right? I mean, even Final Fantasy X to Final Fantasy XIII, exploration versus lack thereof, it was two polar extremes, even though 10 was already starting to take away that exploration compared to like 7 or 9 or whatever. But with that being
the one that everyone's talking about at the moment is Pokemon, right? I just went back, I watched like a stream of the new Pokemon games, and like the introduction and the tutorial of that is like, come on, like...
Yeah. No, and there's a lot of people...
It just started. You were just in your room. It's like, I don't know, work it out. You just wander around the town. And it was like content to let you just try everything until you got to the final thing, and it's not that annoying, I don't know why everyone's like, suddenly everyone's got somewhere that they need to be and they can't spend 5 minutes wandering around Pellet Town or something, you know what I mean?
Right, no, and you're right. It's really, it's a tough design choice, because you're not gonna be able to appease everybody. So you start to narrow your audience down to who it's going for, where like absolutely.
But then you do though, right? I mean, look at Pokemon. Off the back of Red and Blue, became this enormous. It became like the biggest franchise in history.
Yeah, absolutely. That's true.
Fine.
That's true.
That's a perfect amount of tutorial. Why did you you had success with that level of handholding? Why did they increase it from there? People
that's
can work
true.
it out. I just
that.
don't understand that.
Yeah.
Personally.
Also, in the new one, they even blatantly tell you, like, hey, you're gonna want to talk to people.
Yeah, so, you're right. Yeah,
but one thing,
right.
yeah. for sure.
I don't know. There's also a degree of video game literacy that you've got to have, and I understand maybe Pokemon is a lot of people's first video game, but I don't know, man. I mean, it was one of my first video games. My brother couldn't read when he played Pokemon. He was like 5 or something. Right. So it's like he managed to play it back in the day. So for sure. I just don't understand why they feel the need to do that. I don't know.
Yeah, it always seems to be dependent on. Also, because what are one of the most popular genres now? FPS. Mm-hmm. There's no real exploring. You just go around, shoot the badmen, do stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's a very different nature game. Like going back to yours with my experience with it.
Yeah.
Oh, if you wanted to go on.
I was gonna say, maybe kids' first game now is Fortnite, and when they go into it, RPG like Pokemon, they're like, "What do you mean, talk to people?"
yeah, for real,
for sure.
Yeah,
but but like with my experience with your game, there was a lot of exploring to be done. Like I was definitely drawn by the aesthetic, and then that first area, you're very limited in what you can do because you go to the pawn shop. You repair your bike, you eat ramen. And at first I was like, okay, is this all of the game? But then but then I noticed it looks like there's a limit with how much money you can hold. So what happens with this? So I go into this, I start kind of doing some money management because I was losing so many races. And then later I figure out like, oh, if you boost through these certain things, you can refill your ammo that way without having to wait for the truck to show up. So I started picking up on that. Yeah. Started winning a bit more. Was being able to essentially not like be able to go in with a bike and hunger like at 0%, and go from there. And then once I hit like, oh, okay, I've already got over $500, and then chapter 2 starts. Yep. And then you're thrown into this bigger place. Yep. And I'm walking around. I didn't even get a chance to finish. I was playing earlier today. I didn't get a chance to finish exploring, but I was like, there's a lot of stuff to do in this place.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing that's absolutely incredible because I feel like, and it's so. I hate to be so corny about how this is foreshadowing so much of later's topic, but it just is so perfectly gonna work towards that, kind of like referencing the beginning of the cast at the end, but. It's one of those things where I saw a couple of I'm not going to throw them under the bus of who I saw playing your game. I'm not trying to start fucking feuds or some dumb bullshit like that. But I saw so many people just give up on I was like, bro, you played the game for like 10 minutes and then they give up in that first zone and they're just like, now of course this is using hyperbole on their words. They didn't say this exactly, but essentially they kind of just end the video and go, this game's bullshit. I'm done with this. It's just the same shit over and over again, and it's just like, but you didn't even get to chapter 2. Yeah. Like, you didn't even let it open up. It's like what? Like you said earlier, can't you be fucked for like 5 minutes of your life to like try to figure something out? But you're right. There's just so many people nowadays that they just want that instant gratification that when they lost a couple races, then because granted it is possible to. At least I saw someone do it on their end. It didn't happen to me, but. If you do keep losing and then your bike gets too fucked, you do kind of have to restart the game to, at least from what I saw, there may have been a mechanic to get around that, but they basically fucked themselves up when they spent all their money and then they fucked up the bike and then they lost again and it kind of got them in a catch-22 of, I can't play anymore. So they would have had to have restarted, at least from what I could gather. And certainly they gave up. But it's just a shame because, Josh and I got to see that there actually was more to it than that, but to see those two content creators just give up so easily just because they formed this opinion or got frustrated with their experiences with it, then they just go... They go and point at the developer all of a sudden as if you had anything to do with the fact that they couldn't not have their hand held for a few minutes, So it's frustrating, even from a consumer to consumer.
Like, I'll 100% take that as a criticism, but like in maybe a different way than what they're saying, like, oh, this is crap or whatever. I think the problem... was that I didn't make it limited enough. I think that maybe that opening, that first chapter is open enough that people might assume that's all the game has to it. Whereas if you look at something like, so that beginning was really, we had these big kind of arguments, me and David from Occupara, the publisher, and he's just like, you just got to get people out of that intro bit quicker and get them into, and I'm like, no, because they need the skills, they're not going to get there. And I wrote in this like essay about why the original Driver on PS1 was like the greatest intro to that game, right? Because the game is all about you being this great driver, and it opens with you in the garage, and you have to do all these like key like maneuvers within it's like 2 minutes or something, right?
Yeah, I remember
and you have to do them all like
back
back to back. And no one does it first try. It takes you like 10 tries to do it. And that's the first like half hour of the game is you in this damn garage on like probably the hardest part of the game.
Yeah, arguably.
But once you do it, you're like, all right, I can drive a car now.
You're right.
Driving this car, and then it lets you go, and then the game is like easy for the next couple of hours, and then it starts to get harder.
Absolutely.
And I really, really like that game, and I really like that intro, and I kind of wanted to be that. And the thing that I didn't identify when I was like using that as a template was that game really sells itself on being open world driving game.
It's stuck to its guns.
People know there's more after that, and I think that was maybe the problem when people want to quit out of Desert Child is they're like, maybe this is all there is. Maybe it's just an arcade game. So I really probably should have pared down that intro bit even more to be like, get good at doing these things.
But, man, to be honest, and I'm not trying to just because you're the guest, I'm not just trying to give, like, all the sympathy just because, but I really do feel like that wouldn't be fair from an artistic integrity point of view, in sense of, like, it's hard because you were just trying to not be, again, like that overly hand-holdy 2019 Pokemon. Obviously, this didn't come out like, when Pokemon Sword and Shield did, but my whole point being is a lot of modern games are with that issue of just being too hand-holdy.
Yeah, some of them get flooded with tutorials.
And so grass is always greener, like it's so easy to look back at it now and say that, you could have maybe tapered it down here or maybe made it a little more obvious there. But again, the game's been out, you got your criticisms. It's so much easier to look back then and say that than in the actual process itself. Because like you said, you've already given a couple examples of the back and forth you've had to go to with your with your publisher and stuff like that in terms of their opinions on mechanics as well as you as the developer. So, you always go back and forth and stuff like that, and it's hard to say in the moment and say that you could have definitively known that would, and we still don't know, and we'll never know technically for a fact that would have made it that much easier for some people, because who's to say that another mechanic wouldn't have just,
well, I mean, that's what I'm trying to get to, I guess, is that the second chapter is a lot harder, but by the time people get there, they understand how you've got to look after your bike, you've got to manage your money, your hunger, and do all these things. So,
especially
without
when the
that
guy has higher
understanding,
rates.
It's going to throw you in there. You're just going to screw up and get even more upset.
Right.
So
it definitely.
I mean, it's a balance, and I think it is up to the designer and the developer to strike that. And for some people, I guess it was just a little bit not right, but
Yeah, exactly.
I did my best.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's all you can really ask to do, because every game has its negative critics. Even critically acclaimed games like Dark Souls have a ton of people who bitch about it all the time. Professional reviewers who bitch about it all the time and are just like, this was too hard, anger face. And it's just like well, the game was designed to be a little bit not so fucking easy. Like, that's not really, it's crazy. Like, sometimes you can never please everybody, and this is just another example of that. We talk about it a lot on this podcast, but it's one of those things where it's tough. You just gotta, at least in your sense, you stuck with it not in a spiteful way, but you stuck with it in an artistic integrity way. Like you said, when you play Driver, the original Driver, which, man, that series gets so different in the sequels, but when you play Driver, they really were trying to drive home the importance of the basic mechanics and what you need to know for the game to be playable / enjoyable. And I can totally see that being the exact same thing in Desert Child, of coming off maybe a little convoluted at first. I don't know if that's the exact word I would use, but maybe a little harder, a little obscure to figure out at first. But once you do, you taught the player what they need to look at. Instead of, imagine if you started that second level, people would just be really fucked at that point. Because it makes the first level seem like a cakewalk once you go into that second area. So, but yeah, so there's that. So before people accuse us of beating the dead horse, you mentioned you were working on another game. Is there any deets you can kind of hint at a little bit, or you can talk about, or is it really early in development where you're not really able to talk about it at liberty of not spoiling anything right now?
No, I can talk about it. Hasn't been announced or anything, but I don't think it matters.
Hey, there you go. Exclusive.
I'm not one of those people who's like, oh no, we're going to save it for this big announcement, and I'm sure it'll be fine. Yeah, so I'm working.
Let's get it.
Yeah, so I've got another thing that's in an early prototype that may never come out, but whatever, we'll leave that. But the one I'm working on that's definitely coming out in some form, working on with a friend of mine, Rob Groth. And it's got the working title, we're not sure if we're going to keep it yet, of Cardboard Kings. And it is a game about running a card game shop. So you run like a Magic the Gathering card game dealer.
Nice.
Yeah, and people come in, they want to, they're like, hey, can you improve my deck? And you help them, and you look at cards like when new sets are released, and you've got to work out what cards are going to be like the kind of heavy hitters from that, and which is just the filler trash.
Like the chase.
And then you got to watch the pros, and you got to go, okay, what cards are they using? What are they going to use? And then work out, basically, and then buy low, sell high based on what you think the meta is going to do. And there's more to it than that as well, with like running a shop and the commerce of it all, but that's kind of the pitch.
So you don't know this, but Josh is a huge TCG mark of a couple of different series. So this sounds like something so far up his alley.
That sounds really interesting.
It sounds awesome, man. Hey, man, we definitely keep us in the loop. We would love to, you want us to shill it or whatever, you got some prototypes, hit us with that, man. We would love to do some videos to check it out, give you feedback, man. We're there for that. That sounds like a really very ambitious. That sounds like that would be a lot to manage on the dev side.
The design of this game, because we had to design a game within the game.
Yeah.
And we're just getting to this now where we're like just kind of getting it right. So we had to make a card game up that is easy for players to like pass the cards and work out like, is this a good card or not, like very quickly, so they can then assess decks and things. And it's just like, it's really weird.
Shit, man. Card game manager 2020 or something.
Basically. But that's really cool. That's
it's a weird game where like every time we talk about it with anybody, and this is what the reason we were like, we should make this game, was we had the idea. Whenever we talked to anybody about it, everyone would be like, oh, you know what you could do? You could do this thing. And they come up with like some new idea, and every single person would come with some new idea that was like what card games meant to them or whatever, and it was we were like, man, this really like inspires people's imagination of what they could do, and we we'd write down their idea and then
that's great.
Kind of go back home and work on the prototype. So but that's probably going to come out like mid next year.
Cool. Nice. Well, we're very anticipating that. That sounds really ambitious, but really cool, because you are basically developing a game within a game. I mean, that's gameception at its finest in terms of like getting that going. So that's really cool, man. That's Cardboard Kings, man. That was definitely a title to look out for. So when you get everything published, obviously I say this so assumingly, but PCs probably, because you can just give out free betas and stuff like that a little easier than going through certs for PS4 or Switch or Xbox. With that being the case, that would be such a perfect... this was just me wanting to talk about the Switch again and how this would be a great game on the Switch, I feel like. Like, that's a kind of, I don't know, like a management thing like that to go.
We're focusing on PC and Switch for this one.
There you go. As every game. So that's great to hear. That's really, really cool. All right, so winding it down a bit on your end, then we'll get on to the news, because there's a lot of juicy stuff to talk about today. What are some of your... first of all, how old were you, and when did you what was the ring where you heard the calling of, like, I really want to get into game development? Because I think that's everything that every gamer has thought at one thing in their life, and then they realize how hard that shit is, and most of us walk away and don't even attempt that. When did it kind of come to you when you were just like, this video game developing something I'm gonna do?
I think when I decided I was going to do it as a career or something was when I was like 21 or something. Mm-hmm. I finished uni and I got this job at like a social media, like digital agency, and it kind of went out of business and we all lost our jobs, and I just kind of had all this savings. And I was like, I'm going to teach myself how to make a proper video game.
Hey.
So kind of did it. Yeah. But yeah, I'd been kind of making like little hobby games and things from high school, and before that, when I was like a kid, I remember do you guys know Tintin?
Yes.
Tintin?
The
Adventures of Tintin?
Tintin. Yeah, so I loved Tintin as a kid, and I used to try, and I did it multiple times. I'd like get like the butcher's paper out and just like crayons and just like design a Tintin game, like just like drawing the map of it essentially, and it would be like this bizarro kind of just change into a million different types of games and stuff. But it was kind of like, I remember like vividly designing this weird Metal Gear Solid kind of like, or not Metal Gear Solid, like Metal Gear, like top down, like Tintin stealth game when I was like 8 or something. And like, but yeah, and I remember like taking that to my dad. I'm like, can we make this? Can we make a game? And he had a friend who was like into computers or something, and he went and got this like HyperCard software, which I believe Myst was developed in, or, or the precursor to Myst or something. Mm-hmm. And he went and got that, and I like made all these kind of like adventure games and stuff in that. And then yeah, I got really into like making maps and things. I used to make like maps in Heroes of Might and Magic 2.
Oh yeah,
an amazing game. Yeah, I remember once I spent like weeks making the entirety of like Middle Earth.
Damn, that's ambitious.
And it was just like, yeah, and then the thing is, the stupid thing, you know, like back in the like old days of map editors, they would like, the game would crash if the map was too big, and I spent weeks making this Middle Earth map, and then I tried to run it and it just wouldn't run. And I was like, no.
Oh man, damn it.
That sucked. No. Yeah, and then and like Tony Hawk's Underground had like a really robust map editor. You could like create challenges and scenarios in that and create like whole levels, and I used to just make just crazy things in that all the time. So
well, it seems like you were built for death.
Always wanted to do it, and then yeah.
That's really cool. You've named obviously a lot of games you played kind of growing up. What would you say, if you could narrow it down to at least one or a couple, what are your like favorite series growing up that just like to this day are like probably you would consider your favorite game or games?
Oh man.
I know it's a lot.
I don't know.
You obviously play a lot of games.
I was thinking about this the other day, and like I played so much Sega Mega Drive. I think you guys the Genesis or whatever.
Right.
And,
yeah.
But kind of thinking back at it, I remember like playing it in a real like I didn't really like the games. It was just like I liked video games, but
right.
I really liked SimCity. My dad had that on his like Mac or whatever. I used to play that all the time. I guess Tony Hawk. So when I got a GameCube, and like Pokemon. I used to play Pokemon all the time. I don't know. I've got like all these memories of just like really weird, bizarre games because my dad's a gamer and he just used to kind of curate my game selection. So I never really have those memories of like going to the game shop and buying games. Right. You know, like he would just buy them for me and or buy them for himself and be like, you can play it. I was like, okay, cool. Yeah. So yeah, so I never really, I guess my taste was pretty much just whatever he was playing. So like he really liked Pokemon and I really liked Pokemon, like the cartoon, and he was like, there's a game, we can play it together. So that was probably the
That's
most
cool.
important game in my like upbringing. Like Pokemon, like Silver was probably the one I just thrashed so hard. The game is so good.
Yep.
And then
I love the best one still.
Yeah, Tony Hawk's Underground was the one. I think that's like the peak of the series. Like everything is sort of converges perfectly on that one. I think it's got
that was a great one.
The best maps. Yeah, it's got the biggest selection of maps. It's got like the mechanics are like all there without before they started going insane.
Yeah,
and it's got really, really good level design. I think the levels in Underground are really underrated. I played that game for like 2 years straight, like a couple of hours every night. That was like my Halo 2 for, because I got a GameCube instead of an Xbox, and all my friends got Xboxes, so I was an idiot. Yeah.
Well, people who love CRT monitors would definitely say you made the better choice, so there's that.
I mean, GameCube had a pretty good library.
Yeah, GameCube definitely did.
GameCube had a lot of...
The GameCube is a great console, but... probably... I don't know. Probably would have enjoyed playing Halo with my friends more.
Yeah, in terms of like, I would say that a lot of us had that part of it growing up, but a lot of us did play Halo when we were younger. So yeah, no, I get what you're saying. Yeah. How about soundtracks? What video game soundtracks? Like, obviously, Tony Hawk had some great licensed ones. Were there any particular scores or game exclusive music that you really liked growing up? Like that you hear a song still now and you get really nostalgic or get really hyped up about it?
Like just the intro to Flashback. Flashback is one of my like favorite games, like 2D kind of games, and the intro to that with the song. I'm not gonna like hum it or anything. But
no, you're good. I'll link below
if you
that
look
what
up
it
the
was.
Genesis version of that, because like it's different on like the Amiga and the Super Nintendo and stuff, but on the Genesis version, that has like the coolest opening of any game ever. It just gets you pumped. Nice. It's amazing for a 16-bit game,
Yeah, that's a lot.
Oh, actually, you know what has a great soundtrack is the story of Thor, Beyond Oasis, I think it's called, in like PAL territories or whatever, or NTSC, I don't know, whatever. That's got like the best use of the Genesis Mega Drive sound chip that there is. It just sounds like horns and like a proper orchestra. It sounds amazing.
Nice. That's cool.
I don't know, I don't think I've got like great soundtracks.
I'll definitely say you probably named two of the more unique ones.
Pokemon's probably the best one, actually.
Which one?
Pokemon.
Oh.
Pokemon. Yeah, Gen 1 and 2.
Yes.
Probably Gen 1 is the stronger. But
yeah, they had some
cool, I was
man.
listening to that, actually. There's like on Spotify, there's I think it's Braxton Burks, I think it's called. It's like a group or a composer or someone who's done these arrangements of all the original Pokemon soundtracks, and they're just like, they're so good, they're amazing. And you listen to those and then go and listen to the ones that they did for Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, and it's just night and day. The ones Nintendo did suck. Like, even if you think they're good, go and listen to the Braxton Burks ones, and then go back and you're like, oh, these are terrible. These sound really bad. Like, like they've got like, guitar and drums in the battle music to make it exciting, and then you go and listen to like Braxton Burks ones, and it's like, wow. Like, it's just strings and horn, and it's just amazing. Yeah. My brother's like a classical music guy, and he's just like, he gets really angry. He's like, I can't play Pokemon anymore. They ruined the soundtrack.
Yeah, it's really interesting when a fan like made sometimes fan made levels or like music reworks and stuff like that almost somehow outdo those who literally do it for a living. It's a little crazy sometimes that can actually be a thing.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of fun to kind of hear people's different takes on stuff, because different composers have different styles and whatnot, so there'll always be different takes on that. But
I just thought of another one as well. Final Fantasy VIII, best soundtrack.
Yeah. Whoa!
Thank you.
Thank you. That's another classic, man.
Final Fantasy VIII. I was playing that on the Switch recently.
Yes.
I'm just like, God damn,
the music,
it's so good.
Yep.
That's great. Man, that opening sequence with Liberi Fatali.
Yeah, the opening is epic. Walking around, when you're going around Balam Garden, and when you're going around, when you hear Fisherman's Horizon, or when you hear, like, there are so many special pieces in that soundtrack that's so amazing. Ironically, one of the ones that they always push the most from that, Eyes on Me, I wasn't really crazy about, but like all the other songs in there are like really super dope. So like, man, you tie everything to those awesome moments.
The timing and like on them, like the battle theme is like a 4/5 or something. It's so weird.
It's definitely
it almost seems like a soundtrack where he was just like, oh, I'm just gonna challenge myself to like write in this like. In like the wrong key for this emotion or something, and all the wrong timing or something.
And given how many soundtracks he'd done to that point, that's probably what happened. I'm sure by the time he got to 8, he had done so many of the Final Fantasy soundtracks and Chrono Trigger or whatever, and otherwise, where he was just like, all right, let's change it up. So that's most likely what happened. But oh god, I'm so glad you mentioned that one. That is
Man with a Machine Gun.
Man with a Machine Gun. Oh.
Maybe I'm a Lion. Premonition.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff. We can go on and on all day about that. But everyone else will
they're all good. Like there's not a bad or even mediocre song on the whole soundtrack.
It's great. Good. Yeah, no, for sure. Before we get into the news, we're gonna get through the channel plugs real quick. Mr. Oscar, well, no, we already talked it's coming up with you. Definitely keep an eye out for Cardboard Kings. Do you have anything else coming up? Any con appearances or other projects you want to plug real quick before we start the news segment?
Not really. Sorry.
Any social media we could find you at? Twitter, anything like that, where if anyone has something to say other than complaining about they didn't get Desert Child, is there anyone that ever someone get at you for a positive thing?
Please. I wish I got more people like that on social media and things. It's just, everyone's super polite. When you hear things of like, oh, these people went Epic Store exclusive and got all these death threats. I'm like, where are my death threats? No, people are only nice to me. People only give me really constructive criticism. It's really weird.
Have you tried to panhandle for death threats?
Right?
Please.
Little death threat cup. Dude, shaking the little death threat cup.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not fair. I'm on Twitter at Moomoomang, MOOMOOMANG. That's like mildly racist, I think. I don't know.
But we'll evaluate it and see.
Yeah, I don't know. No one's ever brought it up, but I'm just like, a bit weird. But and I've got like a YouTube where I put trailers up and stuff, but that's just Oscar Brittain. So
there you go. Cool. We're gonna have those linked in the description, of course. Mr. Josh, where can everyone find you on the internets?
Twitter and Instagram at Joshiro Joestar, YouTube /ShiroPlay5.
Miss Mallory?
You can find me at Instagram at awesome_melly.com or
.com.
Whatever Instagram is. I'm sorry.
That's fine. That's funny.
And then, that's about it for right now.
Okay. All right. And you can find me at ZDRocker.com. No, I was joking. You can find me at ZDRocker. You can find all my projects at SlimNationEntertainment.com, as well as the episodes of the podcast at DisconnectedCast.com. Normally, this is where our ad roll would go, but we don't have one right now. I am in talks with several people who are going to likely replace Radio Public for our ad roll spot, but at the moment, as it stands, no current sponsor. But you can definitely keep an eye out for Cardboard Kings sometime, hopefully mid-2020 release on Switch and PC. So there's that. But we'll definitely be keeping an eye out of that. We'll keep you guys in the loop of anything we hear about from Oscar directly. So we'll be in touch, brother, of course. But let's get into... before we get to the video game news, a bit of non-gaming news that I did want to bring up. The CEO of Gainax, a reputable anime company known for releases such as Evangelion and whatnot. The president of the company, Tomohiro Maki, 50 years old, has been busted for taking topless photos of a teenage underage girl and is going to bye-bye land in prison, where a lot of those people end up. He's also been accused of touching her inappropriately, etc., etc.
Oh, wow.
Everyone in the studio, of course, immediately doing an about face and running the fuck away from him. anyone in relation to the new Evangelion movies who are being handled by a different studio anyways, as well as any other projects that's being handled by Gainax is all immediately like, we never, and stuff like that. They're immediately, going that way, and for understandable reasons, Hideaki Anno is immediately like, don't at me, don't know who that is, like, he's just like,
new
whatever.
animation studio, who dis?
Yeah, basically. So, it's one of those things that just does... The anime industry already gets enough flack for awkward underage themes to begin with, so this was just an accusation and a big problem that just the industry and what people think about anime sometimes just didn't need. Just more unnecessary ammunition. If I remember correctly, he was just promoted this past October, so grand opening, grand closing as far as his time as the Gainax president goes. But yeah, I mean, that's a thing. If you like Gainax stuff, just don't be a creeper, I suppose. Hopefully the next president will last a little bit longer than a couple of months. So there's that. Speaking of abusive bosses, we have Razer CEO Min Liang Tan. Sorry if I fucked up the pronunciation on that. A lot of ex-coworkers coming out and talking about, go surprise, seems par for the course now in the gaming industry, abusive workplaces. People are coming out with, mentioning emails that are just straight up. It's not even, okay, so a lot of corporate, especially corporate America, but I'm sure corporate everywhere, you get your very passive-aggressive emails, or you get, very, the polite threats and stuff like that. For Tan stuff, apparently it was just straight up like emailing employees like, are you fucking off, or you want to fucking get fired, firing people via email, just like crazy shit like that. Like, apparently the dude, he is super young, not that that makes it any better, and apparently he used to be a lawyer before he co-founded Razer, but so don't add us, please. But what was I gonna say? But it's one of those things where, like, it's just, I just don't get it. Again, it's starting to become par for the course. We hear about all these. We don't know if it's just becoming more common, or people are starting to become more vocal about these type of toxic work environments. But it's just, I mean, it's Razer. I mean, so...
I will say it's upsetting to hear, because, I follow that dude on Facebook and stuff, and I've always been a fan of him, so...
Yeah, my version of that earlier this year was Jeremy Soule and the rape accusations and stuff like that, like the dude who made the KOTOR and Elder Scrolls Morrowind and Oblivion soundtracks, the soundtracks I fell in love with and absolutely still want to love. Oh, the dude who composed those, a total creeper, and the type of rapist who also like turns the victim into the predator. They try to turn the victim into the predator type of person. So that's a fucking mess. But yeah, it's a bit shit to hear sometimes when someone like that kind of seems like they're kind of cool ends up being just a total fucking knobhead. So there's that. But again, it's just sad to hear the common... This is just becoming so common. Like, Oscar, in your area, it's pretty much, at least for Cardboard Kings, it's just you and one other person, right? So if there's an abusive work relationship there, it's pretty easy to tell who the problem is. But but I was going to say, you've never really... Oh, go ahead.
No, sorry, what was the question?
No, I was just going to say, you've never really, because you're always on smaller projects and there's less personnel, you're not dealing with, studios of upwards of a few hundred people that say you're in charge of or something like that. Because of that, I'm assuming you've never, but I was going to say, if there is any cases of any time you've kind of been subject to toxic work environment in the gaming industry, if you had any examples of that you were comfortable talking about, but obviously if you don't have any, or if you're not comfortable about talking about them, you don't need to. But I was just going to say, if you've ever experienced the kind of thing where, just fucked up your vibe in terms of work environment goes.
I mean, yeah, I guess it's not really spoken about in like indie, because I don't know. I think because independent games are very US focused or whatever. In their market and the centers of like GDC and San Francisco and things, but people really pushing themselves and putting themselves into unhealthy work environments as, you know, lone creators or small teams. Obviously, being in a team helps because everyone can look out for each other. But I know on Desert Child, I definitely I would never develop a game in that way again. I was just putting myself under so much pressure to get things done in a certain way and in a certain time period that, you know, you end up, like your health suffers. And it's kind of hard. Yeah, again, like there's like a outlook, I guess, that it seems to be like an American kind of thing of like, well, like you gotta give 100%. You gotta be better than it. You gotta put more effort in than everybody else, and then you'll make it.
Right.
And you know that it unfortunately seems to like pervade the entirety of indie games, the world over. And I look at some indie game creators or studios who aren't going for those big, you know, we're going to win an IGF. You know, maybe they still do really well commercially, but they're like a niche or something. And you look at those people and they're always like, they seem a lot happier. They seem a lot more, because they're not chasing some kind of like big stardom thing in video games. And I would sort of, I mean, if anyone's listening and they're wanting to do video games just by themselves, I would say, look, focus on like doing that and doing what you do in the way you do it really well, rather than trying to, you know, push yourself to do more than everybody else, because that's, you know, eventually that's a ladder that runs out, because, you know, one person can only do so much. So if everyone's just trying to do more than everybody else, then everyone's gonna collapse. But I think that's a harder thing to kind of talk about, because people go, well, what are you going to tell all these independent artists to just, no one's allowed to put more than 70% effort into any project, you know? Like it's hard when you're just passionate about working on something.
Absolutely. I think in the sense of...
So it's hard to tell people that.
Absolutely. And in the sense of Tan, in his case, it's just one of those things where it was the approach, especially. Because, again, especially in the corporate world, everyone is under some sort of pressure, or everyone is kind of silently threatened. The thing with him is, then the reason he got under open scrutiny was the fact that he was just extremely unprofessional and very outwardly toxic about it. And not saying that silently choking someone is any better than outright assaulting them. That's not what I'm trying to say. But my whole thing is, that's what's scary, is that you can almost do, like, some workplaces do what Tan does, but because he only got caught because he was so overt. Whereas some people are doing what he's doing, but because they do it so backhandedly, they kind of get away with it. And it's just a little, you know, scary. Yeah. And you talked about crunch and everything.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't have experience working in that kind of environment or anything, or know anyone who's had that kind of thing happen, so I can't really, like, talk about it.
Okay, but that's good then.
Yeah, I think the idea of crunch, I think it has gotten worse. You know, I don't know, I haven't experienced.
I mean, it's become the
what
norm,
it was 25 years ago, but it does seem like it became, you know, an exception to the rule to kind of being the norm in the last, 10, 15 years.
And it's really fucked up, because the companies, like, if it wasn't for people being so much more outspoken about protecting the people now, the thing is, they were always trying to hide behind it. You know, BioWare called it BioWare Magic. Rockstar, I don't know what the fuck it is with calling it Magic, but Rockstar basically called it Rockstar Magic or some shit like that. Like, these companies basically, Activision Blizzard, like, there are so many that are known for... Gearbox, like, doing that bullshit thing where they go, you don't have to, because you're a dev that's on a project-to-project contract, we're probably not going to renew you, and you won't have a job anymore once this game's done, but you don't have to pull the 80 hours of OT. Like, for Red Dead 2, people were reporting work weeks of up to 100 plus without any proper compensation. You know, people who were being... either some of those hours being unpaid, and they were kind of coming in on their recreational time because they were scared to be let go or not be on the next Rockstar project. And then the fact that the companies just outright come out and just go, but guys, it's how the magic happens. It's how the game gets good, is we got to do these horrendous... it's like they try to justify it that way. These horrendous work conditions are necessary for a good game. In my opinion, if that's the case, fuck that then. I'd rather take a game that's being handled by a different studio, or like in Platinum's case, takes a while. Yeah. By the time Bayonetta 3 comes out, it'll have been in development for like fucking 7 years. But I would rather that and know that the dudes at Platinum are being treated fine and working at a normal pace and experiencing a polished product than getting some overly patched nonsense that came out of the sake of a lot of people not being able to see their kids, or actually starving themselves, or, doing some ridiculous shit. Like, no entertainment medium is worth that. So it's just one of those things where it's just scary that it has kind of become the norm. All these companies almost priding themselves, until there was a lot of backlash about the pride of it, that were almost bragging that their employees work more inhumane hours than anyone else. It's like, why would that be
I think there always was that sort of like badge of honor. Like, if you go back and look at, old, back in the 90s, if you read like old magazine articles and stuff, people would kind of brag, like, we're doing 7 days a week until the game's out. And it's like, wow, that's so great. And I really think it is just a cultural shift that now it has reached a tipping point, and people are starting to look at it and go, you know what, I'm sick of doing this. Yeah. So.
Yeah, definitely not worth killing yourself over, that's for sure.
Because, there's, again, like it becoming a norm, rather than an exception. You go back and read or watch anything about the original development of the first, like, 3 or 4 Tomb Raider games, and it's like the way that core design, the company was set up, was that they were all like stakeholders in it, so they all got like percentages and things. And they were like all in a probably very unhealthy way, like pushing each other. It's like, we've got to make the next game for next Christmas and next Christmas, and we're going to do this.
Yep,
and so they all end up making a lot of money out of it. And it's it's one of those things where it's like, look, if that's an exception and that one team does it, and you go, oh, look, that was kind of fucked. It's like a thing of like when one kind of fucked work environment happens. Right. But everyone sort of comes out of it at the end going, oh, that was okay. Unfortunately, it does go, everyone else, let's all do what they did. And it's like, that's not why they were successful. It was other things, but everyone can see that. So then they go, oh, okay, we've all got to work like insane hours,
Yeah, and Tomb Raider is actually a really interesting case example for you to bring up, because I do remember that. And what's ironic about it is when they saw the amount of money Tomb Raider was making and they turned it into an annualized series, a lot of, when you're crunching every year, and not that crunching once in a few years and crunching every year is like, one's better than the other, but the whole thing is, the thing that got even more worse about it is they were forced into having these 365 work cycles, but then the quality of the games also started gradually dropping. Arguably after Tomb Raider 3, everything just started shitting the bed perpetually.
And they didn't change the culture of it. They just said, well, clearly this team just can't do it anymore.
Yeah, no.
Fire them, create a whole new team. It's just like,
then
what
the
hell?
Angel of Darkness, and it got really bad. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, how are you not seeing the problem there?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just one of those things where, it went from being an exception to the norm, and I think that in the end, that's what got really fucky about it.
It's crazy how these big businesses make terrible decisions. Like Konami with Silent Hill. Like, hey, can you make those awesome games with like less of a budget?
Yeah, can you make Metal Gear Survive and it sucks ass? It's like, it's insane. I don't know. There's no good segue to go into the next story. I was gonna try, and then it just didn't work out very well. I was gonna say, speaking of a more practical company, but then there'd be a ton of people who are going to go actually and blah, blah. Yeah. Anyways, Xbox announcing that for the next gen, which is already coming next year, which is crazy, holiday next year, we're going to have the PS5 and whatever the hell Project Scarlet ends up actually being called from Xbox.
The Xbox 2.
Oh, God. If they just really want to get fucky, just fucking do it. But they did announce that they have the 2 models that are going to be coming out at launch. Codename Anaconda is going to be the full-fledged one, as well as the Lockhart, the equivalents of that being the Xbox One X and the Xbox One S. Of course, the cheaper one, they're going to go ahead and stick with being the all-digital platform. Of course, earlier this year, they released the Xbone SAD, also known as the Xbox One all-digital, Xbox One S all-digital, the Xbone SAD. But although it sounds like a bad idea because of the digital medium, where the average gamer usually does all digital now, and that's why GameStop's going to die for many reasons, but with the case of moving towards an all-digital future, for better or worse, because we've talked about the cons of that, but they went ahead and they're just going to nip it in the bud and say, hey, if you don't want a disc drive, if you're not using this as a Blu-ray player, if you're not using this if you have no intention to buy physical games, and you only want to do digital, here's a cheaper version. In my opinion, the fact that they shave off like $50 to $100 for that version of the console to accommodate what the style I do already anyways, I think it makes a lot of sense. And then you have the full-fledged console, that they're going to have all the bells and whistles. I don't know if it's going to have a RAM difference or anything like that, or any sort of spec difference. But I believe if it's anything like the Xbox One, the Xbone SAD and Xbox One X, it is going to be that was the higher end one, but it's going to be the Xbox One S versus the all-digital is just literally that. The Xbox One S versus the all-digital version is just the disc drive is missing. That's it. So with that being the case, it seems like they're going to just go ahead and start it like that, knowing that the market's going that way. That's the news part of it. The thing I wanted to get a take on, we've talked about this before, but what I want to talk about, Oscar, obviously you played a lot of games growing up, so you've kind of had all sorts of different mediums and everything when you've experienced this, but now we've entered an age where we're entering all digital. And one concern we express a lot is when you go all digital, you're at the mercy of the console, Sony or Microsoft or Nintendo, where they can control content in a way. For example, when Silent Hills got canceled and the PT demo was just removed from PlayStation, so if you deleted it, you couldn't re-download or stuff like that, or the Telltale games are no longer allowed to be sold digital, and there's all sorts of examples. How do you feel as a developer about this all move towards a more all-digital future as opposed to analog? And do you see it more just affecting consumers in this way? Or do you see some sort of way, maybe that we're not looking at, that maybe on a devs might be pro or against an all-digital future for gaming? I know that was a shitload of words I just spouted out, I know. But
I think, for me, as a developer, I can't speak, I haven't spoken to anyone about this, but I think digital's the worst thing that's happened.
And a lot of people feel that way. A lot of
video games. But for a couple of reasons. Obviously there's, I wouldn't be here if, we didn't have digital distribution, blah, blah, but as someone who now, I'm like, well, I could do games physically, obviously it's a bigger risk. So, there are pros and cons there, but the biggest cons would be that, games kind of disappear, and there is, that control that people have. I think that constantly being able to update things, that now there's no original version of it. Something that now we've done an update to Desert Child that added a few things and tweaked a few things, and if you don't want to play that update, you're kind of screwed, right? You can't roll it back.
Right.
If you weren't one of the 2,000 people that got the physical limited run version of the game, then you can never play that version again.
Yeah.
There's also it kind of sucks for a consumer in that way that we have control over it and we can update things and change things. And from a preservation point of view as well, there's a part of me that would like to go back and play the original No Man's Sky when it was just bare bones. I don't like where they took it, and I think
there's some people that
down in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
And I can't do that. And there's lots of games that have been updated to a point where I don't like them anymore. And there's a lot of games that don't exist anymore, and I'm like, well, that sucks. But also, from a developer's standpoint, there's now a consumer expectation for support for games to be there indefinitely. If I release a game Desert Child, it's been out for a year. In like 2 days, it'll have been out for exactly a year, and we're still having to do like updates and support and things, and we get like bug reports and things like that, and it's like, okay, that's fine for like a year, 2 years, but we get to a point where that game's on Steam, it's going to be for sale for the foreseeable future, and I'm going to have to update that for new like graphics drivers and things for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's a thing.
And
it's
if it
true.
was just a physical disc that ran on one thing, then it's like it's out there. I don't have to deal with that anymore, And
it's true.
You might be, there's people might listen to that and go, well, that's very selfish of you. You created this game and blah blah. It's like, yeah, but that means that every game I create, I'm just adding another huge responsibility in my life
on
that
your
I
shoulders.
have to like do, And it's like, if someone buys that game in 20 years' time and it doesn't run on Windows 20 or whatever, they're going to send me an email and be like, what the hell, I paid $15 for this game, it doesn't run. And if I don't get to it for, which I think is reasonable in 20 years' time, if I don't get to updating Desert Child, for a few months or something, then that person's going to be angry, and then I look like a dick, and it's like,
it's like, when does your term stop?
When do I I'm now like committed to these things for the rest of my life, and I don't know, that kind of scares me a little bit. I've just been thinking about that and just thinking like, I don't know if I really want to, Desert Child to be a part of my life for the rest of it,
not for the rest of it. When do you get to go, here's the expiration date of updates? If it doesn't, because especially when Windows 10 dropped, so much of my Steam library had compatibility issues at the ass. Like, we could go on all day about even games now, like Vampire the Masquerade, if I didn't get the fan-made patch for it, that game doesn't run on my fucking computer. Like, I had to go out of the way to get a fan-made fix for Windows 10, the exact build that I'm on, because, and the people that made Vampire the Masquerade fucking 15, however long fucking years ago, it shouldn't be on their shoulders anymore for me to go bitch at them, and if they even exist as a studio anymore, because some of the games that I was trying to play that wasn't compatible, those studios are dead and gone. So I can't even get a hold of them, even though I wanted to fucking cry about not being able to play it on Windows 10. So where does that responsibility stop? You're absolutely right. And I think we talk about...
but then there's like a flip to it as well, where I would love to go back and play the original Splinter Cell Pandora tomorrow, but the way that that game, the way it's like graphics shaded or something worked, there was something about it, and it used some graphics architecture that just isn't a standard anymore, and you can't emulate it using software unless you have like an insanely like more powerful than a really powerful computer,
Right.
So it's like that game is not playable anymore on PCs. So unless you have an Xbox with that game, it's gone. And it's like, there's a part of me that thinks that, oh, that sucks, because like if Ubisoft, I think it was Shanghai. It's like, well, wouldn't it be great if they could go back and update that game? But they probably don't have the source code. But then like that's me as a consumer saying like, oh, it would be great if they could go back and do that. But then they don't really have a responsibility to do that. I don't think. I don't expect them to go back and do that.
And it does suck, and that's one of the reasons why I still have my original Super Nintendo. I still have my Genesis, my Xbox, all that, because what if I want to go back and play those games? And it's hard now because, there's also TV resolution.
Yeah.
That's an issue, too. Yeah, and I've got a CRTV sitting in the garage right now.
Yeah, but not everybody does.
Yeah, so that's one thing. It's definitely an issue where, a lot of these companies don't think about, like, what video games really mean to gamers, because there is that experience when you play something the way it was, like when it came out, and not many people really consider trying to preserve that.
Yep.
And then also another problem with digital. One of my main issues is you don't really own it.
Nope.
Yeah.
Because the license gets pulled. PT, for example, even if they had charged me for that, because of the route it went, because of the licensing issue, it's a licensing issue.
Yeah.
Even if I had paid for PT, they would have given no fucks, and I still could not be able to re-download that game ever again, even though it was free in this case. But there are case examples of.
Well, I mean, the ones that annoy me is like I think it was Grand Theft Auto 4 or 5 or whichever one had to patch out a bunch of music, and you're like, what? No, like
that's weird.
You've changed. You can't do that.
You didn't renew the license for the music.
Like I can't believe that exists. I can't believe
that's a thing.
Rockstar wouldn't just get indefinite licenses for this.
Yeah, for that game. For 4, this is licensed for, let's just say it was 4. I don't remember. I remember what you're talking about, but I don't remember the exact title. But yeah, for 4,
I think it was 4.
Yeah, so for 4, it's licensed for 4 forever. Like, that should be it, as long as 4 is being produced on a legal side. Maybe if there's a new license for it, you're licensing it for Switch, and the Switch license doesn't have access to that music, that would be understandable. But to retroactively go in on fucking PC or Xbox or whatever and just take that shit out is insane.
That's
the fact it's even a thing.
I know. I know there was that recent thing I heard about was it Tron Evolution?
Tron Evolution.
Yeah, like if you had it digitally, like you can't play it anymore.
Correct.
Unless
you already had it installed. That was the example I was trying to think of.
Yeah, and what was it? I think Disney owned the license.
That's why.
And they're just kind of like,
they're kind of like, no.
We hear your concerns. We might get to it, maybe.
Not.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll be part of Disney Plus. But anyways.
yeah.
No, but yeah, it's just one of those things where, exactly, that lack of control is where the fear comes. Even for me, where I'm spoiled by the convenience of it, and I'm like, kind of like, really deep in on the digital age because of Steam and not, being fucked with having to swap out discs and stuff like that. It does put me at the mercy of those in control of it, whether it's the platform holder or the developer or the publisher, whatever kind of like future legal dispute that could ruin me being able to have the ability to own that game is really fucked up. And like, you're right, that's the problem with this kind of stuff. So yeah. Speaking of digital fuckery, Elder Scrolls Legends, the mobile digital TCG, has been put on an indefinite hiatus, aka canceled probably. But it's one of those things where if you are a player of TCG, which is arguably not a bad game if you're into games like Hearthstone, stuff like that. I was more of a fan of it just because I don't really give a shit about Blizzard lore, so for me it was cooler to be like Elder Scrolls lore. I like the card game, but I'm more into Elder Scrolls lore and characters, so that was more interesting to me. So if you're a fan of that, they basically have just said that, in so many words, not making enough money, so we're not putting the time into it, so fuck off until maybe we feel like coming back. It's weird, because they did say it's a hiatus, but the way they described it's basically not. They said the roadmap's been delayed indefinitely, there was supposed to be some new meta card that was supposed to come out by the end of the year, that's just been delayed indefinitely. Their big I'm sorry is everybody gets a free booster pack, or deck or some shit like that. But again, being all digital, if the game gets shut down, if they shut down the servers, if this really is a permanent hiatus, aka cancellation, what good is it? Give me all the fucking free cards, but if the game fucks off or isn't going to be updated ever again, has no tourney, presence or anything like that, if you have no real incentive to ever play it again, how is, here's a few free cards, like the big, you know what I mean? But yeah, so they said that's going to be the case, and this is once again a big problem with an all-digital future. You have people who spend tons of money on packs for that game. That game came out in 2015 originally to combat Hearthstone, and here in 2019, how many people were really into that game that were hoping to play it for, however long, and maybe spent tons of money on it. And this is the issue with dumping stuff into a live service as it is, so that's just absolutely insane. That'd be the equivalent of, like, obviously you play like a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! And a few other TCGs. That'd be like if they were just like, give us all the cards back because that's not a game anymore, so you got to turn in all your cards.
It's not a game.
All those cards were printed with a special ink that is set to dissolve at this time.
Yep.
This game will no longer exist.
Yeah, it's just wild. Like, there
that
are
Black Lotus you paid thousands of dollars for. Guess what, fucker?
Well, I mean, there is like an equivalent of that would be like the ban. No, not the banless. What is it? The
Well, there's
like the power 5 or whatever it is in Magic, where it's like the cards that will never be reprinted, and they made a commitment to never reprint them.
What the fuck is it called? I think it's a reservation
restricted list.
Something like that.
Is it?
Something like I've heard. I know what you're talking about, but there is a certain list where they said they're never going to print a card ever again. And
and it's like, if they did, then people would be pissed off. But I don't know.
Yeah, that is a thing.
Yeah, it's just crazy. Yeah. Just this week alone, that's already 2 pretty hot topics related to the all-digital future. And again, we're just going more and more towards it. Because from the publisher's point of view, digital is also cheaper. Because printing all those discs and manuals or those little shit pamphlets now. God, I miss those full-fledged manuals.
It's cheaper, and yet they still charge like the full price.
Exactly. That's the thing where it's that standard premium that you could justify. Okay, so if it does save costs, say for every thing disc they don't print, they save an extra $5 or something like that. So why is it still $60 then? It's one of those things where where are they making up? I mean, the fact that games have just inflated that high is just with no real justification other than hiding behind production costs despite it being all digital. All this bullshit is
But they
crazy.
Make more money now. Games make so much more money than they used to.
They're like,
games
they charge
cost
more.
Twice as much to make, and it's like, a game selling 1 million copies. If your game doesn't sell 1 million copies, then that's a failure. Whereas back in the day, it's like, if your game doesn't sell 150,000 copies, it's a failure. Yeah. So it's like, they're making 10 times as much money, and they're like complaining they cost twice as much to make.
Yep, exactly. It's just crazy that this is, and it's all the thing. All the, especially the big wigs, you're talking about your EAs and your Activisions and all that shit. They're the ones who make the biggest stink about it, which is just hilarious, because then you have, like the average indie game costs about $20-$30. Children of Morta cost me about, it was a weird one, it was like $21.99. I don't know where they came up with that figure. But a lot of other indie games I play, like the Tour's coming up, $19.99. Desert Child I think is like $15 and stuff like that. So you have a lot of these games that I'm having a better experience out of. And you could argue it's no 120-hour Witcher 3, but for the price I'm paying and the more reasonable thing, and knowing that more of that is probably going to an actual person instead of a CEO, is much more comforting. And it's kind of why, especially on the Switch platform and PC, where you have a lot more indie games, I think that's why I really do like to support that market for it. It's not to be a hipster. It's not to find the next hot, dev that might be the next Devolver darling, or anything like that, or Way Forward or anything. But it's because I feel better, because I'm just like, they can give me a full-fledged game for less. Like, these other hacks are just like fucking with me, basically. They're actually ripping me off by giving me a more broken $60 game that they promise to fix sometime never, as opposed to something that comes out a lot more polished. And again, it may be on a smaller scale. You're talking a 10-hour game, but you're also paying exponentially less, so it's still a full experience for much cheaper. And to me, it's just insane that we do live in an era of, like, I'm just waiting for the announcement and trying in bullshit justification for games when they now cost $80. And they're going to try to cost, AAA titles is going to be costing that much now. Like, it's absurd. It's just crazy that it's just it's getting out of control, and all these excuses are always being debunked, where people are just like, it's actually cheaper now to do this because it's all digital and all that stuff, and but don't want to go on too much about that. But at the same time, it's one of those things where it gives me a headache just thinking about it, basically.
Do you remember when you would get, because you were talking about the little, like, inform pamphlet that came in the game. Do you remember when that used to be a booklet, but you also got a poster? That's why I only bought that's why I still only buy physical copies, is because every so often you get that poster. I remember having those, like, decked out on my wall.
Yeah, like Elder Scrolls Skyrim came with a poster.
The maps,
It makes me sad that we don't get those anymore.
I think Breath of the Wild still had one.
Oh, yeah, Breath of the Wild did.
Wow.
Yep, Witcher.
I was so excited when I got that.
Haven't seen these in years.
We hung it on my sister's wall.
The Witcher 3 Switch had all the stuff that came with the PS4 and Xbox One version. So, yeah, it's nice when some companies still try to give enough of a shit to do it, and still try to shave the premium when they can, because even The Witcher 3, at least the physical version, was like $50. So even they tried to go $10 under the AAA standard. So they're trying, because CD Projekt, obviously, Witcher 3 on Switch, to me, is still such a technical marvel. Like, they made the right sacrifices to fit it on... Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Mallory, interrupt the podcast. No, I'm just joking. But anyways, no, but it's just one of those things where it's interesting to see some people, because CD Projekt Red is in a weird status where they're not necessarily indie, but they're not the average, AAA studio. So, yeah, I don't know. There's that. Well, Mallory left. I was going to move on already, but now I'm not going to just... It's fine. Wow. We'll just go on. But, let's fill for time. Do you have, Oscar, a physical release that you kind of hold dear? Like, for me, for example, Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, when I opened that shit and it had a full-fledged manual and a map, that to me back then was already mind-blowing, even though there were still proper manuals back then. Was there a physical copy of a game that still holds dear to you, that you were just, like, you remember opening that and you were just like, this is, like, an experience?
Sorry to sound like a broken record, but yeah, like, the original Pokemon games was just like, had such great little manuals, the way they would lay out stuff, they're just great. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really nice. Does
Yeah.
anyone know why green was blue here in the States? Why? Because it was green and red in Japan.
It was green and red in Japan.
And then it became blue, and I wonder if that's a marketing research thing where they're just like, people don't like green in the States.
Yeah, part of me thinks that's probably what it was. And I guess there was, at least over here in America, I think there was already the norm of the whole red and blue, 1-player versus 2-player. Like, that was always kind of the palette swap, really. So that would be my theory of it.
I don't know. Why was it red and green is my question.
Yeah, so I guess it is a Western thing where we kind of expect red and blue.
Yeah. So I know they changed the characters because in the Japanese manga and the story, red is the main trainer, and then green was essentially who was Gary, but they changed it to blue, and then there was a confusion because there was a third trainer, she was blue. And then they were like, she'll just be green now. So.
Yeah, and the original, like, Pokemon Adventures or whatever it is.
That manga is so good. It's a great manga.
I watched, there's, like, a YouTuber called Mother's Basement, and I watched his video on it, and I was like, this sounds like the greatest comic of all time.
It's so weird stuff, yeah.
Like the strange things that happen.
Yeah, like the Elite Four is trying to destroy the world and stuff like that.
Like, actually?
Yeah, because they're just like, you know what? Pokemon are great, but humans are not. So let's just get rid of humanity for the benefits of Pokemon.
Okay, Sephiroth.
Yeah, it was intense. That was good.
That's cool. All right, so follow-up story from something we covered earlier this year. We talked about, actually might have been when John was still here, but we talked about Riot going to court and having also the protest walkouts due to the misogynistic work environment in the company that started to have proven cases and not just hearsay. Well, Riot decided to go ahead and settle out of court, and they will be paying a total sum of $10 million to every female employee, as a total, $10 million total, given out based on the severity of the cases and accusations, anywhere from artists, both for artwork and musicians, who were just straight up not paid for characters they designed or whatever, just because, it has a very dude bro environment there, apparently. And a lot of them were just like, oh, that's a cute idea, uses it, and then doesn't pay them for it.
Oh, jeez.
And so, so every female employee between 2014 to 2019, there's going to be a sum total of $10 million being paid out to them as settled in court. So we'll see. It's nice to see something like that actually follow through to something. It would have been nicer to see Riot get punished as opposed to just settling out, but I'm sure $10 million to them versus how much League of Legends and who knows how much their fighting game is going to make, just to kind of squash it now instead of fighting it for years, probably cheaper for them. But It's nice to see the deviations of it because some of the stories that were coming out of that were just absolutely wrong. I mean, you had cases of obvious like physical and verbal sexual misconduct in the workplace, but then on top of that, the fact that some of them were just getting their ideas straight jacked and not getting any type of bonus or related raise or promotion that's related to doing something like that, like creating the next bit. Like there was one girl who at least drew a couple of the most highest selling costumes for some of the characters and stuff like that. And her work was just straight up, oh, this is just company property, so we know you're supposed to get some sort of like a royalty or big bonus for this, but you know, you're part of Riot. It's kind of fair game. We're just using your design and stuff like that. So we talked earlier about toxic work environments. This is just another case of that, but it's nice to hear that it actually ended in a way that it may not undo every bullshit thing that they did, but it's nice to see that they basically got beat enough to be like, yes, okay, we're wrong. And even though it's almost like, I wouldn't say passive aggressive, but in a way they get to call the shot by being like, okay, fine, we'll pay $10 million and get the fuck out and stuff like that. But at least that got taken care of. An interesting bit of news that I got to hear about this week. I forgot if it's out already or if it was going to come out soon, but it was a game I was interested in, but turns out I kind of really misunderstood. It was Darksiders Genesis. So when Darksiders Genesis was shown earlier in the year, it was kind of like a more pulled out view of like, and it showed like you saw war and strife and stuff like that. And for anyone who has played the Darksiders game, it looked really different because it looked like it was going to be an RTS style or Diablo style given the look of it. Turns out it's just a pulled out camera version, but controls pretty similarly. With the exception of Strife, who's a brand new character who has a sort of, according to Laura Kate Dale, has a more twin stick use for them, the way they use their weapons, stuff like that. Who else was there? It was War, Death, and the Four Horsemen.
Plague? Was it? No, wait. Pestilence.
Pestilence, yeah. Well, anyways, the Four Horsemen are all...
They're called, like... they're not called the actual Four Horsemen, are they, in Darksiders?
No,
they're like, oh, Famine doesn't sound like a good, cool
so they
guy,
changed it.
They called something else.
Yeah. So it's Death, War, Strife, and whatever the fuck. But anyway, so they're finally all playable. Strife is the brand new character, has a bit of a twin stick mechanic. But it's always interesting because from a marketing point of view, there were a lot of people who kind of lost interest in Darksiders Genesis because they thought it was going to be an RTS. And a lot of people who play character action games aren't the biggest fans of Fury. Okay, that was the last one. Thank you. So War, Death, Fury, and Strife. But yeah, so it's one of those things where the game is known for being a certain style, so it was weird to almost retain that style, but then just change the camera angle. Like in the fourth game, all of a sudden, just be like, the camera's all the way over here now. Now, from what I've heard on a technical report of it, what it seems like is that the textures are a little lower res, a little bit less to render, because the detail can be a little lower because it's so pulled back. And it almost seems like from a technical perspective they use that the change as an excuse to get away with rendering less or making it run at a better frame rate, which the Darksiders series doesn't have the best frame rates. I mean, the remastered versions, you're talking about a last gen game on a current gen console, obviously it'll run smoother because that shit was meant to run on fucking 10-year-old hardware. But in this case, when this is a brand new game, if that is the case, we'll see Digital Foundry's actual report on it, but if they do one, but if that is what they're doing, that's a little shit to kind of make something less quality just to get away with it by pulling the camera back.
They're probably like targeting a Switch release as well.
That's a good point.
Well, we can get like a... Because the old ones came out on Switch, right?
The first two did at least. I believe they're still waiting for 3 to officially come out if it hasn't. But for sure, the War Mastered Edition, as they like to call it, and the second one, the Definitive Edition, because they like the War, they like to incorporate it. So whatever the fuck they'll call Furies, whatever the fuck, and then this new one. Yeah, you're right. That's a very good point, and that's probably what they're gearing towards. It's kind of with Outer Worlds. When Outer Worlds dropped that text scaling patch recently, it almost seems exactly gearing towards their announced Switch port, where obviously with a smaller screen, you're going to want to scale the text up probably for varying levels of eye strain. So yeah, no, that's very, very good point. See, that's why you need that dev side of it, that dev brain, using the old noggin, and actually thinking about what's going on that side instead of me being a shithead and being like, it's too far. The camera's too far. No, but I will say though that would be better. That'd be a little more comforting for me to know of maybe scaling down the tech shit to gear it, because maybe
as a developer, it is nice to have the platform that now everyone wants to be on be the one that is the least powerful, because it just means that you don't have to put in sparkly stuff just to keep children happy.
Yeah, which is true.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, it's on PS4. Oh, I guess we've got to have.
It's gotta look hella fucking
deferred rendering.
shiny.
I don't know, something else. You know, like
HDR.
On the Switch, no one complains that something is pixel art.
Absolutely, that's true. And I think it's why it's such a exactly. I mean, I was just gonna repeat what you said, so there's no point in me doing that. But yeah, it's nice to have that kind of neutral contender, and I think that's where Nintendo really strives, is just doing their own thing. It's why they don't take Xbox and PlayStation head on, and why their consoles spec wise have never really, other than when the GameCube was arguably the strongest one at that time, because versus the PS2 and the Xbox didn't exist yet. With that being the case, the GameCube was on steroids compared to the PS2.
Resident Evil 4 looked great on GameCube, and then you see it on PS2.
It looks like dog shit. I only got that version because you could play as Ada, and it was not worth it. But yeah, so it's interesting to hear that a lot of devs really give Switch that support, because I also love the console, so that's also a good thing. But it is nice that it's kind of the unsung heroes and the indies kind of like ability to get on there and not be scrutinized by children and be like, it doesn't look as pretty as the latest. It's not sparkly and doesn't have fucking 4K graphics I can't even comprehend with my tiny eyes and shit like that. Like, it's just It's a nice little middle of the road console. That's arguably the best one. So there's that. What an objective podcast. So recently so we're going to get into the main topic coming up right now. And if you'd like to hit us up with some feedback, you can either hit us up on our social medias or email us directly at disconnectedcastmail@gmail.com. That's disconnectedcastmail@gmail.com. And we got a bit of a double header here. First, we have the whole YouTube issue that's going on. There's something important happening this week. If you want to fill us all in, Mr. Josh, on what's going on with that.
Yeah, so there's going to be essentially a YouTube walkout that's going to be going on later this week through the 10th through the 13th. Pretty much the reason for it is because there's a new... they're adding a clause onto the terms of service which would allow YouTube to terminate your access or your Google account's access to all or part of the service if YouTube believes that you may be no longer commercially viable to them. And that's really vague as fuck.
Yeah, they basically gotta just have control over your channel.
Yeah.
In short.
So, and usually one of the big things that people are seeing is that this is going to be very harmful for LGBTQ plus creators, because they're already having a difficult time as it is right now.
They get no ad revenue.
Yeah.
If you talk about any of that content on there, you're immediately demonetized.
Yep, pretty much. So there's going to be a essential quote unquote walkout. So content creators who are participating in this, they are not going to upload anything throughout that time frame through December 10th through the 13th. Some content creators that I follow, they've also urged to not
watch anything.
To not watch anything, except maybe with the exception of anything that may be related to the elections going on in the UK, because I believe election day will be on the 12th, if I'm not mistaken. So at least some of the content creators I'm following, they're kind of like, that's kind of the exception. If you're going to watch anything, go ahead and watch that. That's important. but otherwise try not to put any traffic
to the site
YouTube.
to show them what it would be like if everyone just fucked off. Which
yeah.
I think that's why this could use such a signal boost, because unfortunately so many people do watch YouTube every day, myself included, tons of hours of it, either playing in the background or I'm watching it. But I will be participating in that walkout as well. My scheduled Wednesday First Impressions, Few Minutes In It episode is canceled for the week. So what that was going to be, not going to say. But that'll eventually air once everything kind of, the point is made, but I am going to be participating in that blackout time. Yeah. So I will not be uploading anything during that time period. This podcast episode, when it comes up on Monday, is going to be one of the final things that you're going to see on there for the time being until we get all that ironed out, even if there's an extension to it, so on and so forth. But aside that, my episode for this week's canceled, so I'm gonna definitely be part of that.
Yep, there is a petition online. I know I sent you the link.
Yeah, so we'll link that below.
There. Yeah, if anybody happens to follow me on Twitter, I signed that petition earlier today. Oh, if not today, maybe yesterday. I forgot. I signed it, and so I do have a link on my Twitter feed with that. If anybody wants to check that out. But yeah, and of course people are always like, well, boycotts don't really do anything.
Which is the thing that makes me tear my hair out every time, because we're always telling people when Activision Blizzard said fuck Hong Kong, when Gearbox was just being the pieces of shit that they are with Randy Pitchford, and so on and so forth. People would always hit me back with, well, what difference is it going to make? I'm going to buy Borderlands 3 because even though they essentially abuse their employees, what can I do about it? Yeah. And the problem is millions of people having that what can I do about it mentality, because, I understand that from my point of view, it's so easy for me to just say, don't play your favorite game to make a point, because for some people, Overwatch or Borderlands or whatever is their bread and butter. That is the game that they're passionate about and love. So it's harder for them to just say fuck those companies and stop playing those games than it is for me, where I enjoy them, but I have no problems. If Platinum did something really stupid and, like, God forbid that ever happened, because they're my favorite devs, but if they do, guaranteed it'll be hard for me, but then I would boycott their games if they did some piece of shit thing that deserves to be boycotted. But the problem is when you have that mentality, that give up mentality off the bat, and just go, what difference does it make? I'm gonna fucking stream 20 hours of YouTube tomorrow.
Yeah.
Then everyone does that. No point made. But if everyone really does stick to this idea and petition, especially content creators, it's a big deal.
It could possibly change things.
Yeah, because the main purpose...
The petition that you sent me.
Cool. Because the main purpose of it is just to show, like a moment of solidarity, that everybody's like, hey, if we don't give them their traffic, hopefully they'll see some numbers dwindling a bit and maybe hopefully scratch their heads and
say maybe don't do this dumbass policy.
Yeah. So
maybe rethink what you're about to put into effect.
And it's crazy that this is like it kind of happened at the similar time, but more publicly aware of it around the time of the whole COPA thing, which has been a nightmare as well, because that whole thing, even though it's through the FTC, is basically like, well, in our opinion, this content is targeted towards children. We could hit you with a fee, or we could terminate your channel, or we can remove ad revenue, or whatever the case is. Yeah. And it's one of those things where it's just like, that was just sheer YouTube's, because this is not a new policy. It's been around since...
I mean, COPA has been a thing for a long time. To my understanding, this really harmed YouTube more, because YouTube was just taking all these things that are targeted for kids and collecting data and
which
all
is
that
hella
stuff.
illegal.
Yeah, and so most of the stuff that I've heard, it's more YouTube is trying to, I guess, either shift the blame, and even though, the good thing, like we were talking about earlier about this, is that the FTC's, somebody will review it.
Yeah, at least a human will.
Yeah, not some shitty algorithm.
The biggest risk you run through is, even though human does... I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but just be careful, is even though humans are viewing it, if they don't understand the fact that your content isn't geared towards kids, they could still make a human error of misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Now, also, one thing I did want to mention, for those who were kind of like asking how this works, or being like, I'm in Canada or Germany, ha ha ha, that doesn't affect me. Oh, it does. Because by uploading on YouTube as a platform, you're an inaugural American who can get just as fucked by this law.
Yep.
Just so you know. For those who don't understand, just because you're international, COPA can fuck you. That up to $42,000 per video fine can affect you too, even if you're in another country. So for those who are like, nah, I'm not affected, I'm from Singapore. No, you are. If you upload on YouTube, you are subject to this. By using that platform, you are subject to it. So for those who thought that, you're making those snide remarks and thought that was funny, we'll see what happens if your channel gets affected. So, yeah. And the thing that sucks about it, too, is if you are supposed to be a content creator for kids, proper toy channel, not Elsagate, but proper toy channel or anything like that, you're fucked immediately. Because by saying you're a children's focused channel, you get no ad revenue out the bat. You're immediately demonetized.
Yeah.
You because they cannot collect information on children, and you've just now admitted that your videos are to be watched by children. Therefore, you don't need to know any of that info. Therefore, ad people don't get info. Therefore, they don't want to run ads on your shit. So if you're geared towards children, you might as well just fuck off, because you're making $0 and you ain't getting nothing anymore from YouTube.
So I have a question. How does that work for YouTube Kids?
You get fucked in the eye. You don't get shit. You can be on YouTube Kids all you want, but you're not going to do it for money.
Oh yeah.
So if you were doing it, if that was your,
they run ads on YouTube Kids.
Yeah, but that's not collecting info though. Those are just generic.
I don't know.
Actually, no, they shouldn't be.
I don't know much about YouTube Kids, but when I see the advertisements for it, I see like what Sesame Street and stuff like that. So
yeah, so it's just,
so are they already working?
But that's not.
That?
That's not because that's not collecting info. That's just assuming kids like Sesame Street. That's not collecting information.
Okay.
When you for those who don't know, let me explain this. I don't mean to be yelling at
I'm
Mallory.
looking at it from my nephew's point of view.
On the
he watches
internet,
a lot of YouTube
on the internet,
videos.
when you use the internet, it collects cookies based on the information of stuff you're looking at. It's why you see an Amazon thing of why
when you just Google something.
Yeah.
It's super illegal since like 1998. Or whenever the fuck it was. I think it was 2008 or 1998. It had an 8 at the end of the year. I want to say 98. The COPA's been around since 98. So this is nothing new. YouTube's just stupid and got super sued by a few $100 million. So you cannot collect information on kids. Assuming a kid will watch Sesame Street is not collecting information on kids. If I was like, wow, this kid looks up a lot of Katy Perry fat material, and then I just started running Katy Perry ads on that child's video, that's super illegal.
Okay.
So that's one of those things where there's ads, but that's not the same thing because they're not collecting data to gear that towards me.
He watches Lego builds on YouTube.
Yeah, so if they show a Sesame Street ad during that.
But is it like actually from Lego, or is it from some...
That's true too.
It's like it's a content creator, and it's one of his favorites, and he watches them build. I mean, I don't pay attention to it because I don't need to watch somebody build Legos. I'll build Legos on my own.
But you know what's crazy about it, because you just made that point. You're not the parent in that case, but this is why there was that. It's kind of funny how none of this had to do with the pregnant Elsa, Spider-Man, weird shit. Yeah. You would have thought that when all that shit was going on, when, like, there's just jizz shooting, like, implied cum shooting across the screen. We're demonetized, by the way. But, like, there's just implied, like, sexual acts happening on the screen, or Spider-Man just taking a shit on the floor and stuff like that. You would have thought this would have sparked concern among parents, but since people are just like, oh, it's just some kid shit, this is the part with pickled dildo in the next screen, because they just assume it's Elsa and Spider-Man, this is safe. That sparked no mainstream controversy. I mean, like, kind of us in the content creator field knew about it, and we've heard about that weird shit. But it was like, where was the CNN coverage or the fucking, the news stuff on it? It's just like, no one cared. But COPA, though, when it's just like, yes, this is illegal, but what about the fucked up shit? Like, it's kind of crazy how there's almost this pick and choose stuff. But Yeah, no, it's very worrisome. In between COPA and this new policy where YouTube is basically like, you all right, mate?
Yeah, someone just dropped a table. It's fine.
Okay, as long as it wasn't thrown at you,
Right?
we're good then.
Is there a secret tables match going on?
That's so fine. It's like a small bedside table.
Oh, okay. Okay. Usually the weird sound effects are coming from our end.
Right.
But yeah, so yeah, it's one of those things where. Anyways, be careful. I think that's what I was gearing towards already. Yeah, just be careful. That's what I was going to say. Yeah, it's so fucked up. Basically, to water it down for those who don't get why this is a big problem, why there needs to be a petition, a walkout, and all this stuff, a digital walkout, is because YouTube, under this new policy, from what it seems, because it's so vague, can go, this Slim Asian Entertainment channel, they're like cussing and saying cum dildos and everything. No one wants to roll a fucking ad for a Lincoln on this shit. Yeah. So this shit's not viable. They're wasting bandwidth. This dude uploads like at least 2+ videos a week, and he's just wasting our time. Terminated. I could wake up to an email that just, other than the usual copyright shenanigans that I'm always getting hit with, are telling me some dumb bullshit like, oh yeah, your channel's just gone. And you can't, at least on your main account, you can't just use YouTube anymore because we found it unviable. I mean, even before this all became to light, Jim Sterling, prolific YouTuber and content creator and journalist, experienced something very similar recently. And it probably was due to this before we were even really known it was this. But what he did is he was asked to make a secondary channel where they could archive podcast episodes, screen replay, stuff like that. Wooly and Pat have it and stuff like that. A lot of content creators do, to not have it flood their main channel. Oh, actually, Wooly only has one, so he could get fucked. But anyways, Jim, that secondary channel, he just had terminated. And he reached out, and he was just like, any reason? And they were just like, yeah, we just, no. And then that was basically it. And then he wasn't getting it back, and it just got terminated. And so that just got a waste of time, basically. So there's that. The second part of our doubleheader or main topic is recently a game came out called Ancestors: The Humankind Odyssey, which was a very anticipated game. I believe I think it's on Epic exclusive for PC, I believe, as well as on the PS4 and maybe Xbox. But all I know is that game came out, and what it did is, we covered this a lot with Oscar earlier in the cast when we were talking about kind of devs having to balance sometimes almost an unfair amount of taking it on the chin as a developer and kind of having to take more of the burden on when it comes to criticism, as opposed to not being very couth to blame the players for being stupid or not exploring. And obviously that's not a very good kosher practice to have, even if in some cases I would argue sometimes user error is more common of a thing than people would give it credit to. But there is a wrong way to go about it, especially when the criticisms do tend to be a little more objective than opinionated. But former Assassin's Creed creator, Patrice, I don't even know how to say his super French last name, go figure, Ubisoft. Desolé, thank you. Yeah. So Patrice Desolé, of course, is under scrutiny lately for being very vocal, but it's more the tone and the way he went about it. Not to mention a lot of offshoot accusations, such as people didn't play the game much, or people probably didn't play the game, and making weird, kind of just offshoot excuses for why the game wasn't good, when it seems like from a general point of view of the average user, as well as professional critics, all seem to agree that the game just generally wasn't that great. There's a few polish issues, a lot of joking about the horse mechanic not really being a thing, and I think just obtuse elements and controls and stuff like that. And one of the biggest things we talked about earlier that I would say is very relevant in this case is Patrice had to be a little more aware that because things are obvious to you as the developer, since you're the one who made the game, it's not always going to translate well to the average player. And whereas Oscar kind of shouldered the burden a little bit, Patrice was just throwing bows and getting all sorts of upset about it. I mean, he went to go as far as to say in an interview where he was just mentioning that perhaps his knee-jerk reaction was because he's used to bigger Metacritic scores, which is a shit excuse because even some people who make games that were critically acclaimed high has released the occasional clunker that's just not so. That's not really a thing to be like, you can always expect your games to be given a high Metacritic because you usually get one, so fuck it, everything gets a free pass. He had a very infallible attitude. Towards the end of the interview, he made the remark of essentially, well, obviously I don't know how to make a video game. It's just the tone and the attitude and the lack of professionalism where you're fucking from the Assassin's Creed franchise. You would think by now you can take a little bit of criticism because guess what? The fucking Assassin's Creed series, definitely far from infallible. Yeah. So it's one of those things where he was just really on his high horse about everything. He also, instead of admitting that perhaps some of the obtuse mechanics were just that obtuse, he went as far as to say perhaps they were a little too highbrow for the average player. Perhaps the average player maybe not have been too smart to figure out some of the shit. Just condescending shit like that. He had a very condescending tone in the entire thing. Now, people may note that Kojima said something kind of similar when it came to Death Stranding, where Kojima was quoted for saying that the reason Death Stranding was critically acclaimed in Japan and was mixed with more mixed reception in the Western world was because the game is more focused on the narrative as opposed to having a more mechanics in general. There wasn't, let's just put it this way. In short, there isn't much gameplay in Death Stranding. Aside the UPS delivery guy simulator, you have a really shitty shooting part, which was actually controls kind of bad. But on top of that, he's kind of not wrong in that sense, though, because narrative-driven games, aka visual novel games, do so well in Japan, but they do not do great in the Western world, especially here in the States. Story-driven visual novel games just don't sell here. But at least in that sense, Kojima at least had somewhat of a point because the game, again, was critically hailed in that region he was mentioning. No one's critically hailing this piece of shit. You know what I mean? And so with that being the case, the main thing it's going is just where, the devs do have a certain amount of responsibility as the audience does in terms of critiquing things, but when it's universal, and again, not very often, there's so many games where the professional critic score will be high and then the user score will be low or vice versa. There seems to be a usual disconnect. This seems to be universal. It currently sits at a 64 Metacritic score professionally and a 5.4 user score. So both middle of the road. Not even bad. Let's note that how insanely upset everybody gets when they don't get these 80s or 90s scores, because 64 is still considered fair in terms of the professional Metacritic score. So it's just the thing. It's there is a big question of this topic lately of where the privilege, there's been terms thrown around of dev privilege, player privilege, who is at fault here. But a lot of the burden in this case really seems like they just made a bad game and they don't want to own up to it. I understand he doesn't want to get fired, or I think it's actually his studio, but he doesn't really want to. He's trying to deflect the flack. I get it. But especially when you're a really high-profile dev like that, you should probably be able to take it on the chin a little bit more. You think he'd be used to it by now with how some of the later Assassin's Creed entries were. But I don't know. So, with that being said, did you guys, before I did have a particular question for Oscar, but before I get to that, any comments on the way Patrice kind of handled the situation? Do you see more, you get where he's coming from, or do you see that maybe he just is too embarrassed to kind of admit the fact that he made a flop?
I mean, there are ways to handle criticism. You know?
Other than calling your player base stupid?
You can, you can take it with some grace.
Yeah, for
some
sure.
Grace.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know him personally. He seems like a pretty, like he's got a big personality.
Yeah,
maybe
that's
a
a
bit
nice
of
way
an
to
ego
put
on
it.
him. I mean, if you created Assassin's Creed and Prince of Persia and done all that, then you might feel a little bit kind of like, but you know, I think maybe that entitlement ends at getting press coverage. You know what I mean? Like, I think he's probably entitled to kind of demand a little bit of attention, you know, when he does something. But I don't know if, I mean, his what he kind of said just seemed a little bit like, you know, he's obviously upset about it. I think also take into account all the, you know, in the context, his context is he had a real messy sort of divorce from Ubisoft.
Yes.
And
perfect. That's exactly where I was going to go.
Like,
very good.
Yeah, the game seems to have been stuck in like a development hell for a few years while he was sorting all that out. So to kind of be that invested in something, he's probably a little bit more invested in it than he was, and maybe had a bit of a kind of seeing like other creators do that, like split from a big publisher and then do quite well independently, like Igarashi obviously,
right?
Kojima now. I'm kind of seeing that happen. Perhaps he's like a little bit.
The fantasy didn't come true. The fairy tale didn't have the fairy tale ending, and that's actually perfect. You went that way because that's what I was going to note. Is I think a lot of it is definitely pride because you did come from these big franchises where you were really dependent on a team, and then now you go out on your first independent foray, and everyone just shits on you, and like. It's got to be a little bit of a wake-up call.
It could be one of those things where in 10 years we all look back and go, actually, that game was amazing.
Sometimes that happens.
There's plenty of games that people do that with. You know, like, everyone crapped on Bioshock 2 when it came out, and now everyone's like, oh, actually, Bioshock 1 sucks. That's the good one. You know?
Yeah, that's true. And then you have games that are big anomalies. Like, one of my personal favorites is Deadly Premonition, a game that is objectively bad playing, bad sounding, and bad looking, but has the Guinness Book of World Records for most polarizing scores, where people have said that Deadly Premonition is the worst game they've ever played, and almost equally as many people hail it as one of the greatest games, in my case, one of the greatest games I've ever played. And I can't really explain to someone why, because again, in an objective sense, it's the right balance of broken, which most games are hard to pull off. And that's, like you said, who's to say that if we look back on it, or perhaps if he finally listens to the criticisms, perhaps, and fixes what people are berating the game on, it could become something a little less, shit, like people are kind of saying.
Yeah.
So, well, the one thing I want to wrap it up on a note of real quick, Oscar, is I wanted to say real quick, what are your thoughts from a developer's point of view because the industry's changed a lot in the last few years, especially in the age of the content creator as we live in now. Whether you're a video journalist, game reviewer, or a Let's Player, a lot of games' fates and exposure lies now on the content creator pushing or exposing it. Like, there's a ton of people who are focused on playing indie games and getting them out there because they don't have the same PR team that Activision, Blizzard, or EA has. So, some indie games do get this right. For example, Desert Child I heard of from a content creator. So I may not have heard of it if I didn't see that. And so, from your point of view, have you had many or any instances of a game you made, or maybe a game you enjoy, perhaps getting either a positive or negative exposure from content creators, and how that's kind of like how you see it as a developer? Because some developers, unfortunately, make games that aren't even that great just for content creator appeasement. It's like what we like to joke about for some people, like, let's play bait, where, like, Markiplier and PewDiePie are going to scream like a bunch of morons while playing a game. Jacksepticeye is going to scream about physics-based thing where you're shooting a guy across there are those games that are just let's play bait, you know what I mean, or people are gonna, like, all these content creators, specific sect of content creators is gonna jump on there, and, like, some games have almost negatively geared towards making some bullshit flash in the pan game just because they know that they're gonna be playing it. It's like when the whole survival horror Five Nights at Freddy's ripoff parade happened and stuff like that. But to get it back into focus, do you have any primary experiences or people you know that have experiences in content creators affecting them positively or negatively?
Yeah, I mean, but, like, personally, having, like, the Diamond Minecart guy, Dan, play, like, my first game when it was, like, really crappy and kind of prototypey, that got it greenlit, which at the time was an important thing. Kind of finding a community. I think it's good to be able to, like, find more niche communities now. I think the days of just like, oh, PewDiePie played the game, that's so great, now we're going to sell 1 million copies, is sort of, that I don't know if that exists anymore, but now it's just there's so many guys who will stream a particular type of game, or YouTubers who cover, only shooters or something. Like, shout out to, like, G-Man Lives, right, on YouTube. He's an Australian guy who just covers shooters. And, if I ever want to know if a shooter's good, I'll go and watch his channel because he'll cover it and it'll be good. I don't necessarily like his opinions on everything, but, it's interesting. And then, there's things like Digital Foundry. Like, I knew about the Tourist, but I wasn't that interested in it. Mm-hmm. And then I'm kind of watching their video on it, and it's just like, oh, wow, this game is a technical masterpiece. That's amazing.
Yep,
oh,
that's
and
what
then
I
I'm
heard.
kind of looking at it, and it's
away.
like Shinan or whatever, and I'm looking at I never played Fast RMX, and it's kind of like getting me interested in perhaps playing something on from a technical perspective, and I'm like, wow, I want to do that. So getting these people who really like cater to these niche, not audiences, but the niche, like, perspectives on a particular game is really interesting. So, and in a weird way, I'm like, yeah, man, what can I do? And maybe this is gross, but I'm like, man, I would love a Digital Foundry on a game I made. I'm like, well, I'm going to have to step up my game then. You know what I mean? I'm going to have to start making 3D games or something. But it's just like, I'd love the idea of there being, also just the idea of there being a singular voice when people are offering reviews or something, because, I can't stand the big websites having 30 reviewers, and it's like, well, who's reviewing this? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's the guy who hates every Pokemon game. He gave it a 7. It's like, why did the guy who hates Pokemon review the Pokemon game? Yeah, no, it's weird when it's like, again, it's and then you just have sites that are notoriously known for bullshit opinions, like IGN. Even though they're a bigger company, they're known for being in EA's pocket. So almost every Mass Effect game, even if Andromeda was shit, still got like a decent, from what I recall correctly, a decent score from IGN, despite the fact that it varied from a lot of other people's experiences with it. And so the content creators and independent voices and stuff like that, I think a common misconception of the content creator is that they're out to get everybody, because once again, obviously I like bringing him up as a big influence of mine, but Jim Sterling, for example, is always seen as Mr. Negative, Mr. Bad, as he likes to call himself, Mr. Bad Video Games Man. And but the thing is, when a game is objectively good, he is more than happy to talk about the positive qualities of a game, even a game that he might consider just okay. He'll try to be objective and, but the problem is they're so focused on because when he does notice a game is bad, he does not let you live it down. To be fair, he's a very ruthless gentleman when it comes to punishing those who decide to shit out an asset flip on Steam or something like that. It's when, Digital Homicide tried to have that lawsuit against them and stuff like that. So I think that there's a big thing where, like, yes, there are negative content creators, but I think a lot of people are just trying to voice their opinion. And I think that from what I've seen, especially on my thing where I try to push a lot of indie games or, you know, not the next Madden or not the next Assassin's Creed, something that could use a little bit more exposure, where even a big studio like Platinum Games, I did my first impressions video on Astral Chain, and despite the fact that Astral Chain sold pretty well, it's still a game that a lot of people had never heard or seen anything about. And when I made that video, people were just like, oh, this actually looked kind of interesting. I didn't know what an Astral Chain was. Or, oh, it's the guys who made Bayonetta, and I didn't know that, and I like Bayonetta. So, you know, it's kind of like, I think that there's a lot more negative light put on it than there actually is. There are negative YouTubers, of course, but I think a lot of people are really just out there to try to voice your opinion. And opinions are always best taken with a grain of salt, and you always want to see collectively. You know, like you said, it's nice to have a YouTuber that you can, a content creator that you can turn to that will be like, when it comes to RPGs, I like to listen to this guy. Because there are some content creators where I like them I pay attention to them for maybe platforms and indies, but I find their criticisms of mid to AAA stuff a little too not objective, and I'm just like, okay, so for maybe something, I like to turn to this guy's opinion to see what he thinks about it, because he's going to look at it more from this, and so on and so forth. So it's good to hear, though, that I forgot that you mentioned that earlier about that awesome experience that you had with the initial game, where it got such good exposure that it led to getting greenlit. And I think stories like that are always just swept under the rug in comparison to this YouTuber said a bad thing about my game that I'm so, you know, the Ancestors case, for example. It's an objectively bad, you just got to be able to take it on the chin sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it also helps I don't read or watch any reviews for my own games.
I hear that's a healthy thing sometimes. I know that some of the bigger companies that are on like teams of several people sometimes have a particular person who scours it for criticism, so that way maybe the creative mind behind the actual concept doesn't see it and get totally fucked up mentally, unlike, you know, reading some unnecessarily vulgar comment and the guy's like, oh, okay, tweak this part of the menu or add this, and he just filters out the toxic bullshit and reads. Because to be fair, you know, I'm also not the most polite person.
That's the thing I've said to people is like, you know, that there's very little in a game that you're like, you read reviews and everyone's like, oh, I've got this zinger and here's my like hot take on the game design not being up to snuff, and you're like, there's nothing. I've read a couple of reviews and seen some videos and things, and there's nothing anyone has said about Desert Child that I didn't know already. Right. No one said anything that's made me really reassess the game. I'm like, okay, yeah, you didn't like that choice I made, or you didn't like that thing that was, you know, unpolished or whatever because I ran out of time, and I know it was unpolished and I ran out of time. You know, like no one's like catching it, but everyone, you know, and that's the content that YouTube and podcasters and everyone are trying to do. You know, you got to sound like you've spotted this thing that maybe someone who hasn't played the game is going to sound impressed by. But
yeah, it's true.
Generally, it's like if you're saying something the developer knows. You know, if the developer makes a bad game, they know it's bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
absolutely.
If they make something that's a bit divisive, they know it's a bit divisive, and maybe you won't like it. But
yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, when unpolished pieces of shit like Assassin's Creed Unity comes out, they were very well aware that the game was fucked and broken when it came out. Like, that's why they tried to fucking patch that shit ASAP, because they were very well aware that they were putting out a half-baked product. You're right. No, that's definitely a thing. I think that that's an interesting thing to take into consideration sometimes when you do make these reviews or whatever. It's why in my first impressions thing, as opposed to trying to seem like, try to have a Gotham moment, unless I do genuinely feel like I may have noticed something that maybe they overlooked, which is a possibility, if not a definite thing. But I more so try to focus on, okay, I'm sure the dev knew that he did this, but here's why, in my opinion, it should, something like that. And I think that people just, if they articulate it better, it'll come off as less snooty. Because you're right, though. In today's social media, because of how fast everyone tries to do everything, everyone always tries to have that hot take where they think that they, again, have a zinger moment or they got him, when it's not something they got him on. Like, the dev, again, was very well aware that that was a thing. So
yeah, like Kojima, why don't you just make movies? Because your games have long cutscenes, and Kojima's just reading those tweets like, yeah, I know. I was there.
Yep.
I made that 2-hour cutscene, you know.
Exactly. Yep. That's true. And I mean, and to be fair, like, man, I think a Kojima movie would be absolute shit. I love Kojima, but I would be scared to see the most. Like, if he made a movie, first of all, it'd probably be like 5 hours long, and then second of all, it would be so hard to follow and be convoluted. I would be like, Kojima, no. Yeah. But no. But big respect to Kojima and big respect to, again, the whole purpose of a lot of this conversation was to show both sides. Me being a content creator in general, and then you being a dev, it was a very enlightening experience to hear both sides of the table, how both sides like kind of view each other, and why it's important to look at both sides, which is something that Patrice should have done instead of getting so defensive and angry. Maybe tried to understand what was maybe misunderstood or perhaps not finished about. Because even if he knew about it, he would maybe have to answer the question of, okay, this part's broken, then why not wait another few months to patch that? Oh, right, money. Yeah. So there's a lot. The point being is there's a lot to take into consideration about video games. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in video game development. But yeah. All right then. That being said, thank you, Mr. Oscar Brittain, for joining us today. It's been a fun and wild ride talking to you. We definitely it was nice to talk to you about Desert Child directly and hear about, was it Cardboard Kings?
Yeah, a working title.
Working title.
I like it,
working title. Game within a game. Gameception. We will definitely be following him on that, keeping track. Remember to check him out on social media, which we'll have linked below. Next week, we have cosplayer Miss Sola Grayson will be joining us. So we're going to be having her on there. It's been a fun rotating door of guests. And again, Oscar, around that time when you're ready to maybe drop it or get really close to an almost finished beta or anything like that, we'd love to have you on again and talk about it and see how things have or have not changed since we last talked to you about it. And we look forward to your future games, brother.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for having me on, guys. It's been a blast.
All right, then. All right, you take care, and you have a good night. And remember, everybody, let me not fuck up the outro, but you can catch us every Monday at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. And until the next episode, we will catch you guys then. Until then, see ya.
Bye.